I am delighted, however, to say I'm joined this morning by Andrew Eborn, who's a futurist and broadcaster and a friend of this channel. Good morning.
Good morning, lovely to see you.
Lovely to see you too. I was very surprised when I saw you this morning.
I know, in makeup, we loved it. What I also loved, David, you still got Santa Claus obviously having problems with border control, trying to get his way back to the North Pole, but I love it. It's got to be good.
No, I know, we're still festive, actually. I'm now in a transition phase because I was very festive and then I'm basically mooting it as we move into New Year. Can you believe it's New Year's Eve? When? Tomorrow?
Incredible. All day tomorrow. It's
all day.
Amazing how
But
that
I don't
happens.
know where that came from.
It is weird, isn't it? This year has been so bizarre.
So bizarre.
And we've lost, as you rightly said in your brilliant opening, so many wonderful, iconic people. And it's very difficult to choose between all of them. And we sort of, each one, sort of, every day you open the newspaper or listen to a report, we lose yet another icon.
And it just reminds me how short life is, actually. And it's so important, and particularly for young people listening to this. You always think that actually you have a long time to achieve your goals. But actually, life is very short. And many of these people set out with a dream very early on in their careers. They achieved it and they continued to achieve. Let's start with Pele, if we can. Obviously, a huge legend. Obviously, had been in hospital for a period of time. He's widely regarded as probably the greatest footballer ever to have lived. And as I was saying, he is the only player ever to have won the World Cup 3 times, including at the age of 17, and that makes the point.
He was,
doing
absolutely.
it young.
Doing it very young. And he was inspired. What I love about Pele, he's been a massive inspiration on all sorts of fronts. He basically put Brazil on the map for football, and every time you think of Brazil, you think of football. He got inspired when he was only 9 years old, and he saw his father crying when Brazil lost a match. And he thought, well, what is this passion behind that sort of stuff? So he got involved in football. And as you rightly say, he was in the World Cup when at the tender age of 17.
Amazing.
And the fact that all the different people, all the footballers around the world are saying, they call it the GOAT, the greatest of all time.
Yes.
And that was a phrase which came about in September 1992 with Muhammad Ali. You might remember, he's the greatest. Fantastic stuff. And his wife did that, Lonnie, basically because of protecting his intellectual property. And as you know, I'm an intellectual property lawyer.
Yes, not
so
a
that's what I'm trying to do. I knew you were going to say that as well. So always good. But the interesting thing is when you're comparing them now, because we just had a thrilling World Cup, even for non-football fans out there, seeing the delights of Messi, and we predicted what was going to happen on that sort of basis. But they always compare, the three they compare, they say there's Pele, Maradona and now Messi. And Gary Lineker has been effusive in his praise of all of them. The thing about Pele is that we don't have as much footage, obviously, as we do of Maradona and also Messi. But one of the things that he does, apart from on the field, off the field he did a lot, because you might remember Brazil was one of the last countries, if not the last country in the Western world, to abolish slavery in 1888. And what he did, he came from a very poor background, Pele, and so it became very inspirational, not just for people of colour, but also for people from poor background, that football is the great equaliser. You can be a global superstar, and indeed he was the first global superstar in football.
Well, indeed, and your point is very valid about being a person of colour, and I think he really was an inspiration in that sense, because he said to young people, you can achieve anything regardless of your skin colour.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I loved about it as well, in his later year, he didn't have the controversy that Maradona had and so on and so forth around him. He did a lot of charity work as well. I had the joy of meeting him. I'd only met him once, but what an impact he had. And it was at a charity event for Nordorf Robbins, who had the music therapy side. And the appeal for him, where you've got the great and the good, not just of the football world, but of politicians and royalty would come out to basically meet Pele. And he was a wonderfully comfortable in himself. He was a wonderfully humble man, surrounded by all sorts of sharks, but a wonderful, humble man.
But also, did he not have quite a varied life? I mean, his life was fairly complicated, wasn't it, off the field?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I think it got more complicated.
I'm being careful what I said there.
Oh, no, I think that it's good to be that sort of time. There was that sort of controversy, if you like, about could he have done more about the race issue? Because Muhammad Ali absolutely took it by the horns and addressed it head on. But he lived in very difficult times, and I think it would be underestimating his massive impact to focus on that sort of side. I think what he has done, he's been a phenomenal inspiration. He is the greatest of all time, based on everything we've seen. He's the only person ever to have a World Cup, 3 World Cups, to do that. And as you say, an incredible 1,281 goals, over 1,300 appearances in his 21-year career. It is a phenomenal achievement. We did know that it wasn't a surprise, because he has been ill for a little while, but an inspiration to many, many more to come.
Yeah, definitely so, and died at the age of 82. Of course, it's great that people are living to the ages of 82 into their mid-80s and so on, but obviously, two together, Vivienne Westwood, of course, tributes coming into her as well. She's been called the undisputed queen of British fashion. Apparently, she died peacefully and surrounded by her family in London. That was according to a statement by her fashion house. Now, Westwood made her name with her controversial punk and new wave stars in the 1970s. She went on to dress some of the biggest stars in fashion. Now, you know a lot about Vivienne Westwood as well, don't you?
Well, I do. I had the joy of actually working quite closely with her son, Joe Corey, who was her son with Malcolm McLaren. And he founded something called Child of the Jago, and before that, Agent Provocateur. And in 2016, it was the 40th anniversary of punk, of the Sex Pistols and Anarchy in the UK. And Joe's point was, well, hang about, it was all celebrated by the establishment. There were punk credit cards and all sorts of fashion houses, basically
which is the antithesis of what it was.
Exactly. It was not supposed to be a uniform. It wasn't supposed to be establishment. And so what he did, he burnt his £5 million collection of punk memorabilia. And there was a lot of press about it. And I suggested, well, if you're going to do that, why don't we film it? And basically that's exactly what happened. It's come out all sorts of iterations. It's now something called Wake Up Punk, which highlights those sort of eras. But the great joy of it is that we got many, many occasions to meet Vivienne and to talk to her about her. And it's very interesting. She's got her book, and we've got a sort of launch that she did, and we went with called Get a Life. And she put it's a fantastic book, because she, apart from being about the fashion icon, she was passionate about the environment, about making a change. She was passionate about Julian Assange and the injustices.
She had a real social and political conscience.
Absolutely, and I think that was the key. And I think that's the sort of side to it. I mean, she basically famous. She helped to inspire the style of punk icons such as the Slit Singers. I know you listen to their records all the time.
The time.
But they basically said Vivienne and Malcolm use clothes to shock, irritate and provoke a reaction, but also to inspire change.
So just, you know, obviously I don't know as much as you do about Vivienne Westwood, but the things that I didn't really understand was the fact that she was actually a teacher originally. And then from my reading this morning, that obviously she then had a shop, and this is with Malcolm McLaren, this is my understanding, and then they had regulars that came into that shop, and they became the Sex Pistols.
Well, what used to happen, so Let It Rock was 430 Kings Road, as she says in her book.
Very trendy.
Our first shop. I was together with Malcolm McLaren. I began fashion as a rebel, expressing myself through clothes. They choose 50s for the inspiration. But basically, every time they had a new collection, they changed the name of the shop. So it was Too Fast to Live, Too Young to Die, and then Sex, and then Seditionaries, and that's when they did punk. And what used to happen, they used to have these characters who would come in to the shop with these iconic clothes, and they would nick the stuff. And very often the police would come and raid the shops as well, because they had all sorts of pornographic images and so on and so forth. So as often as all the clothes were being nicked and so and that. And what happened is that some of the characters, such as Johnny Rotten, would be regulars in the shop. And Malcolm, being the brilliant maverick, he put them together as the Sex Pistols, and it captured that moment in history, that descent that there was at that time.
That's amazing, isn't it? How much of that was calculated and how much of it was thrown together? I mean, as you're painting the picture, really, of an anarchist, someone who was fighting the culture of that time, certainly wanting to break out. But clearly, behind this were some very clever brains.
Oh, Malcolm was a brilliantly clever brain, but Vivienne was the creative force behind that. And she actually came up with the logo. A lot of people wonder where that... I don't know if you can see it, but it's the A in a circle.
The Anarchy. Was that her?
That was Vivienne Westwood. And it all came out when, as I say, we started talking about that sort of side. And even her son, Joe, didn't know that. So all these things she sort of revealed. And it came about because she had the word chaos on a bit of clothing for Malcolm, and she saw that actually in the middle of chaos is the A, so she put a circle round it, and it basically became the symbol of anarchy. So, revelation, Vivienne Westwood created the Anarchy symbol.
I mean, it is extraordinary, and these creative industries in London really, really pushed this country forward. Do we have people like that around today? Do you think we still have that kind of adventurous spirit, the maverick, the person who wants to break free?
I think without a doubt, and this is one of the greatest things we have in this great country of ours, it is our creative industries. We punch way above our weight in terms of music, in terms actually of AI, which I know we're going to come on to as well. All the creative forces in terms of tech, and we should celebrate that. From the Beatles to the modern day, you look at that sort of thing. We have Ed Sheeran, obviously Adele, but lots of great iconic people at the moment who are writing some great songwriters.
Well, it's extraordinary for a very small island, really, that we do punch above our weight and that we do have these extraordinary artists and indeed sports people and academics
yes,
as well.
Absolutely. Stephen Hawking, who was a great chum as well. And we look at... you were reading the list of names, some of the people who've passed, and we were comparing just before we went on air. We've met most of them, which is what we love about it. And they are human. If you prick me, do I not bleed? If you tickle me, do I not laugh? And people who use their position in the public eye to serve the better good, which Vivienne did and Pele did, they absolutely should be celebrated.
So just looking down this list of famous deaths of this year, it is really difficult to pick one out of this. I mean, Her Majesty the Queen obviously is right up there because, of course, she transcended our entire lives. I don't remember this country without her, of course. So she left a lasting imprint, and particularly with the Commonwealth. And then people like Olivia Newton-John, obviously a huge icon, certainly when I was growing up. And then you've got people like Angela Lansbury. Who hasn't watched Murder, She Wrote? I mean, you know, it's just not possible to have grown up and not seen that. And then people like Mikhail Gorbachev, and that was one that really stood out for me because, of course, he was so instrumental in the peace process that followed, and, of course, the former USSR. And I just remember that because I was a small boy growing up and I was worried the world was very unsafe.
And you're right. And when you go through that list of names, it triggers those memories that we've had as a result of it. And also, I mean, but some of them are in their older years. We've lost people really young as well. Meatloaf wasn't that young, that old. Terry Hall was only 62 from the Specials and that iconic stuff, the sound of our youth, David. And we have Maxi Jazz as well, was only 65 a couple of days ago. And the sad thing is, and I always say this about Christmas time, we all celebrate Christmas, it's time for getting together, but also it's the time when a lot of people this year would have lost people very close to them. And my heart goes out to them because it's actually a really lonely time.
It is a very lonely time.
And it makes it really difficult.
It really does. And I think often we forget about elderly people who are at home, who don't really have families and stuff. And actually, if you can put your arms around them and support them, it's a really important thing to do.
Absolutely. Now's the time to reach out and share.
It really is. And it's the time for families. In fact, I was talking to someone yesterday I asked how his Christmas had gone. And he said, well, I don't have anyone, so I just sat at home. And I just thought, that's desperately sad. And actually, we need cohesive communities to come together, to put their collective arms around.
And I think you're right. And I think what happens, David, as well, is that we know lots of people in the public eye, and we've gone through, it's a horrendous list. But there are also lots of people I know very close who are not in the public eye, who have died incredibly young. And the devastation that wreaks on a family and their close friends when it's taken away suddenly. I mean, Pele hasn't been well for a little while and has spoken about his colon
reached 82.
But that's no age at all now. I mean, Her Majesty was 96. And you have, like Tom Moore was 100, you know, you work on that basis. It's all these people, they live for a long time.
So one other thing that struck me about this, and I looked down that list and I grin and I smile because many of them brought great joy or indeed brought peace, or they contributed something so significant to society. And actually, I think it's worth remembering, and it is something I'm very mindful of as a medic, which is life is very short.
Yes. No, you're absolutely right. And so we should celebrate, you know. We live in a very divided time at the moment where the news is polluted with bad news, but there's also lots of great stuff. There's tremendous advances in medicine, which we'll talk about.
We will talk about later on.
And that sort of stuff. And I think we need to look at the positive. Let's celebrate the positive things as well as recognising the difficult times that people are going through.
Couldn't agree more. Well, actually, you are right, because in a minute we'll be talking about a man who had terminal cancer who is now clear of the disease thanks to a UK drug trial. A really, really extraordinary story. I'll be talking to Professor Carol Sikora at around 7:30. But after the break, we'll be going through all of this morning's front pages. You cannot afford to miss that. This is Talk TV. And Christine Jess says, talking about Pele, Maradona and now Messi as greatest footballers, this is one for you, obviously, Andrew. Don't leave out George Best, please.
Of course.
Who Pele himself said he thought George was the best player in the world. And coming from Northern Ireland, he didn't get the world stage he deserved. Do you think that's true?
I think that's right. But people do celebrate George Best. I think this whole... and it's a bit of nonsense, really, about the GOAT and who is the greatest of all time, because within their own times, you're not really comparing like with like. It's a very different era, and all of those. I mean, George Best was a rock star in
well, he really was.
Well, he was
on and off the pitch.
Oh, and they loved it. And this is what people want. I do a lot with sport, as you probably know, and I do a lot with with Formula One. And negotiate.
Your life is something else.
I deal with other people's leisure time. I have the dream life, David. It's got to be good.
You really do.
But I help negotiate for Fuji Television, who are the host broadcasters in Japan for Formula One. And I did all the early deals in the 90s when it was really the time of Ayrton Senna, the other big superstar from Brazil. And he was so wonderfully charismatic, because you have people like Schumacher, and he had tragedy in his own with a skiing accident. But he was far more Germanly clinical to the stereotype.
National stereotype.
Absolutely. But actually he was very focused, is probably the nice way of putting it. Ayrton was a real character in the same way as George Best was a real character. And people love it. Anything that can keep the newspapers, us in the media, talking about them has got to be good.
I think we all like characters, don't we? We don't just want someone who is clinical, as you say, someone who achieves these things. You want the characters like McEnroe, for example. You want the temper and to see the personality behind those players, or indeed those sports stars, or whoever they are. And that makes people interesting.
Oh, you've got to be interesting. They all say the worst thing about being talked... the worst thing about not being talked about on that sort of basis, that's Oscar Wilde, isn't he? He always said the only thing worse than being talked about is not being talked about.
Well, I tell myself that when I read Twitter.
I always talk about it. It's very kind.
That's very kind. Shall we run through this morning's papers as well? So let us start, if we may, with the Times.
Yes.
So the headline here, strike will force the unions into climb down. This is something that lots of people are mooting, is obviously we've got this almost de facto national strike, all these unions actually calling for industrial actions and balloting increasingly small unions. Yes. And somehow, miraculously, they come together.
It is extraordinary how that happens. That's miraculous. So we're both like a sort of touch of scepticism there.
Maybe.
I think depending on what shul you went to. What I love is we've got to put this in balance. And as I said beforehand, everybody has the right to strike. Everybody has a right to have their voice out. Everybody. Well, really? Within context.
Police.
And border forces. Actually, it's more efficient, isn't it? With the border forces.
Indeed. Should border force strike?
Well, if you get the army in and make it more efficient, which is what's happened.
Well, I think that's the risk. Problem. Well, I think the public have said they actually prefer the army.
Well, of course they do, because they're not having the problems. And what I love is about how the media are being fed stories. So we were told yesterday, I was listening to your brilliant show yesterday.
Bless you.
I thank you. I never miss an episode. It's going to be good. But what we were talking about is they're saying that hang about, it's making it more relaxed because they don't have time. They don't have authority, is what you were saying yesterday, to stop people. Well, I think that's a bit of misinformation, a bit of mischief going on there, because it's fairly easy, as you say, to call the right person to get authority.
So that was what we understood yesterday, and we had clarity on that, because there's been a lot of talk on Twitter and other social media about the fact that the army are waving people, armed forces are waving people through, and that's simply not the case. Yeah. So if they are worried, they call over a border force, and they can issue the IS-81.
Exactly.
And that's what we learned. So in fact, the borders are secure, and Ben Wallace made that point very clearly.
Yeah. And I think that's right. And so it's what I love is about question everything. It's what Vivienne would always say, is question everything. Never just accept the story at face value. Why is somebody saying that? And what's
they're in trouble.
Absolutely. And I think what's going to happen is all of these strikes will basically accelerate technology to replace a lot of these jobs. And I think
do you think in many ways they're shooting themselves in the foot?
Without a shadow of a doubt. And when I say everybody's got the right to strike, I disagree. I'm with you on a lot of these things. I think some people shouldn't. What I'm talking about is from a legal position, and maybe the laws need to be changed. I think it's a shame the doctors strike.
They're balancing again.
I know they are. What do you think? You're a doctor. oh, doctor, you're in trouble.
It's a personal opinion. I don't think doctors should strike, but many of my colleagues think that they should have the right to strike. But it's a personal...
Well, we have the same. I'm a barrister.
Indeed. You can tell.
I thank you. Thank you. It's always a joy. But they went on strike. But again, it was misunderstood in the press.
Yes.
Because a lot of people say, well, barristers are all on millions of... And that's right. But some of us are. But crime doesn't pay. And the bottom percentage, when you're starting your first 3 years, a lot of people live in the criminal bar on legal aid. It's under 12 grand.
Well, of course, and the same is true for junior doctors.
Exactly.
And it's very tough, and the hours are awful, and I remember them very well. So you think that actually this is right? The strikes, the cost of these may well actually end the action, and that is what the government is hoping for.
Absolutely, I think that's absolutely right on that sort of basis, because people don't get paid when they're on strike.
Indeed. And
the question is, and they talk about we've moved from the magic money tree to a magic wand. Is the quote in the press today about where is this money going to come from? And I think it's all very well, look, everybody's entitled to a fair wage.
Yeah.
But the trouble is, where is this money? You have to juggle it. And I think the conversations need to happen in parallel. Say, well, here's where the money is, this is how we distribute it, and this is what makes it fair. Everybody is in a difficult position.
I think you're going to see a lot of movement on this. Let's just leave it there.
I think that's right.
Let's move to The Sun now, and the headline in The Sun, I'll just hold it up, which is King of Football. This is obviously about the death of Pele there. We've discussed that already this morning. And then if we move to the Daily Telegraph, again, a picture of Pele himself there, triumphant. But the headline next to it is ministers to look at the new COVID travel curbs. Well, apparently Rishi Sunak is considering the return of COVID travel restrictions for the first time. Now, this is obviously due to China.
Yes.
And, of course... China had this zero COVID policy. It hasn't worked. They've realised that there was huge tension brewing in China, and suddenly they relaxed all of the restrictions immediately. What does that mean? Of course, everyone has run riot, and it means also that cases are soaring. I was just reading now, we don't know the true data, but around 9,000 people in China are probably dying each day, according to the latest
and as you say, David, we don't know the true data, and that's the problem. And the problem with China is that your instant thing is to say question everything. In certain jurisdictions, you have to question it even more so. And the difficulty is the zero lockdown, zero tolerance did not work. And they've now got that sort of other side is, should we be letting? Because a lot of countries are turning around and saying, look, we've had all these problems. We were hoping, it was devastating for those 2 years. We don't want to get back in that position.
We really don't. But what I do think is interesting here, and it may be what the government is trying to think of, and you're seeing this in Italy, is what they're saying is that although we're not going to impose any restrictions, what we do need to do is do a PCR, and that way you will know what the subtype is. Because the key for me is what variants are coming back into this country. Are they ones we've seen already? Are they going to be worse than the ones we already have? Or are they actually milder? Now, one would expect that with a virus like this, it will mutate and become milder. That is what one would expect.
That normally happens. And as you know, I'm a futurist, and we say that what futurists do, they look at patterns in history. And you might remember the wrongly called 1918 Spanish flu. It was wrongly called because King Carlos XIII got it. And the only place that didn't really have restrictions about media coverage was Spain. So all the media spoke about King Carlos, and actually it started in Kansas, if you look at history. So it should have been the Kansas cough rather than the Spanish flu.
Very good.
Thank you. I'm here all week.
You are. Are you? Let's move on to the Daily Mail, and the headline, I think, speaks for itself. Families, growing mountain of debt. Millions of families are struggling with a growing mountain of personal debt. And we've seen this because energy prices, it seems, are going up again. We're going to be talking about that a little later on. Everything's going up. Inflation 10.7%. You go to the supermarkets, it's a horror show.
Yeah, it is a horror show. And you look at the general sort of side, and people make a mistake. They always say, look, we're in the same boat. We're not in the same boat.
No, we're really not.
We may be on the same ocean, but in different boats, is what I would say. But also, we need to be very clear about the language that's used, because you talk about energy caps. And when they first started that, people totally misunderstood it.
Well, I think people still don't understand
So we should explain, for the benefit of that, they're talking about an average household uses X amount of units, and therefore the cost per unit is this, and therefore this is what's happened. The figure is not a cap.
But you see, that is why it's wrongly named. It shouldn't be called a cap.
You're absolutely
It should say average bills should be around this.
Absolutely.
Because I don't think people still understand that.
No, and they don't. And I've had conversations with people say, oh, great, I could have all the electricity going. The maximum I'm going to pay is this. That is wrong. If you and I, on the David Bull Show, on Talk TV, can clarify that and say exactly that, you'll pay per unit what you use. And that's what it is. And all they're talking about is this average. And so I think that's wrong. You need to look at your own bills and say, how much am I using on that sort of basis?
Well, I was at home for the last, 3-4 days with the family, and my electricity bill for that period alone, 4 days, was £100.
100 quid? What did you have on?
An oven.
Good heavens.
I mean, that was pretty much it.
Oh, but it is horrendous. Absolutely horrendous.
It really is.
And it's going to drive more and more people into debt, and that's the shocking thing which is picked up on the Mail and other papers as well.
Well, I'll tell you what, we need to take a quick break, and now, after that, we'll just finish off these papers. So stay with us, join us after the break. This is Talk TV.
Join me, Ian Collins, every day on Talk TV.
There is nothing we hate more than hypocrisy.
Discussing the big issues.
Why was it so hard to establish the deputy leader was at a meeting with her colleagues?
The callers.
Alan in Grimsby, Tracy in Burton-on-Trent. Dave, thank you very much.
Picking apart.
Welcome back to Talk TV. I'm joined by Andrew Eborn this morning, who's a futurist, broadcaster, barrister. There isn't a job he doesn't do. Good morning. Welcome back.
Good morning.
Right, let's go to the Eye now. And the headline is Police Recruits Quit Johnson's hiring scheme in droves. This is about the police officers. Now, there's been a lot of store held by the fact they're going to employ 20,000 new police officers. Of course, we've seen, I think under Theresa May, they cut back the numbers enormously. And they said, no, we've got 20,000 of these coming. It's not going very well.
It's not at all, and that's the problem with these sort of things. You sort of turn around, you get those headlines in the Eye, and as soon as you've got these wonderful policies, and this was a good policy about recruiting people, and now they're basically having to lose all of that, and people are disappearing.
And is there any reason why they're doing that?
I think it's a lot to do with the finances, it's a lot to do with working conditions and so on and so forth. And that's the difficulty, because I think whenever you have these stories, the theme, if you like, for today is we need to put it in context. You need to say, look, why is that? OK, they're leaving in their droves. Is there something that we can do about it? And if there is, then let's do it. If there isn't, then it makes it more of an issue.
Yeah, it certainly does. Right, that's the Eye. Moving on to the Mirror now. It speaks for itself. The headline is The Best, and a picture of Pele as well. And so clearly Pele all over the newspapers.
All over the papers.
This morning, and the Daily Express as well. Again, a great picture of Pele saying the king of the beautiful game dies aged 82. Him being held aloft triumphantly.
Yeah, and quite rightly too.
And rightly so, absolutely. Of course, the headline underneath is rather more dour, I should say. No magic wand for the pay rises. The government clearly is intent to stick this out, just not giving in to the unions. Their fear is inflation.
And they come up with a new soundbite. It used to be magic money tree, isn't it? It's now turned into a magic wand. So, so you're working on that. You're right, but it's a fair point. There isn't the money. Where's the money going to come from?
Who's going to give in first?
Oh, I think the Lynch that stole Christmas would not be the first one to go. I think it's it'll be interesting, because I think the people, and they are genuine, I know we jest about it because it's a really serious issue.
It is.
And I think the problem is that everybody's going to look at it, and I think they're going to all get together and maybe decide. We talk about collaborating. I think they're having discussions behind closed doors of different unions.
Also, I think one other thing, which is public sympathy, and it is waning. There is no doubt, and all the polls show that. I think the nurses are the only ones that still retain public support. But look, everyone's lives have been sort of thrown into some sort of chaos as a result, whether you're getting a train, a plane, going through an airport, or indeed just trying to survive.
Or waiting for your Christmas cards, which won't even turn up by Easter. All of that. It's rubbish, isn't it?
It really is. Let's move on now to talk about really what is an extraordinary story. This is a man with terminal cancer has been cleared of disease thanks to a UK drug trial. The story is this. A man was told he had less than 12 months to live. He is now cancer-free thanks to a UK trial of a new drug regime. This revolves around Robert Glynn, who's 51, a welder from Worsley in Greater Manchester, and he says he wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the astonishing results of the trial run by the Christie NHS Foundation Trust in Manchester. Now, he was diagnosed with a deadly bile duct cancer. This started when he had severe pain in his shoulder. That meant that he was unable to sleep. He went to the GP, had a series of scans and so on, and it was picked up quite by chance. He was then told, devastating news, that he had intrahepatic bile duct cancer. So that is a cancer that forms in the bile ducts in the body of the liver. It's also known as biliary tract cancer. It's rare and affects about 1,000 people every single year. Now, the prognosis is normally absolutely terrible. 5% of people live for 5 years or more after diagnosis, so the majority of those people do not survive 5 years. He was told it was advanced, and then he started a treatment. So at that particular point, he had a very nasty tumour and was started on immunotherapy, and the results have been absolutely extraordinary. Well, here to tell us more is Professor Carol Sikora. He's former head of the WHO Cancer Programme. He's also Dean of Medicine at the University of Buckingham. Carol, good morning.
Morning, David.
This is really quite extraordinary. I got very excited reading all of this. When you look at actually the size of that tumour, it was 12 centimetres in size when he was first diagnosed. The adrenal gland tumour was 7 centimetres, and the immunotherapy was started with impressive results.
Fantastic, and it's a year out, and it's completely cleared according to the reports, which is just the best news for this chap that you could ever have. You know, what's amazing about it, the research to do this goes back 50 years. It goes back to research on fruit flies and working out the genes that control growth in fruit flies. I remember seeing it. I did a PhD in the same lab in Cambridge a long time ago, because I'm a very old oncologist, and I couldn't work out why are these people interested in fruit flies, for goodness sake. The reason they were is they could work out each single gene and how it was expressed in the little fly, and then the same genes are conserved in us and they control growth. They're very old genes, primitive genes in biology. And so by understanding that, they could develop drugs that control the immune system and the growth of cells. And the trial, which is an international trial of a drug called, very unexcitedly, RXC004. And
it's very catchy.
It does seem to have an effect on quite a lot of cancers. Cancer research and changes in cancer for the better don't come suddenly. They come gradually, and this is one of the gradual changes. Understanding growth control leads to better treatments and more patients like this that succeed where, even 5 years ago, he would have died.
I mean, it's extraordinary, and obviously in my clinical lifetime, seeing the advent of immunotherapy is really the holy grail in many ways, because certainly in the past we had chemotherapy we could use where basically we're using toxic drugs which have terrible systemic side effects. But immunotherapy is so clever and so targeted, and as you say, it goes to the very, very basis of the disease process.
You're right. And the fact that immunotherapy was thought of, 200 years ago at my old teaching hospital, the Middlesex Hospital, now part of University College, one of the surgeons decided to take a tumour, put it into a sheep, and then give the serum of the sheep to a man. Both the sheep and the man died, sadly, but that was very primitive. But that was the beginning of it. So it's taken a long time to understand how the body's own intrinsic immune response can be captured and made to target the patient's own tumour. And that's what we've seen here.
And I've been working with a number of other conditions, such as myeloma, for example, again using immunotherapy. The results are so impressive. We could never have got clinical outcomes like this without immunotherapy. I mean, literally, all your disease markers disappear. They do. And the holy grail in immunotherapy is to try and get it away from an individual patient and into big groups of patients, to have a drug in a bottle that you give to everybody with a certain disease, say bile duct cancer or liver cancer, and it targets the right
parts of the immune system to kill the cancer cells. I mean, having to make something for an individual is very laborious, costly, and tedious. And it's risky, because if it doesn't work, that's no good. Whereas you have a powder in a bottle, that's the holy grail for immunotherapy. And it's coming. It really is coming.
And so just, you say it's coming. What sort of timeline do you think we're talking about?
It's already here for certain cancers. This is a first for this rare tumour of the bile duct system. I would say 5 years. It's that sort of time span. There are several drugs out there already, white powders in a bottle that can be used, but they don't work. We're not sure how to use them. They don't have the side effects of chemotherapy, but they do excite the immune response and sometimes stimulate a reaction against one's own tissue, the heart, the liver, the various glands in the body, the thyroid, adrenal gland. So it's a matter of learning how to use them most effectively. And they're not like chemotherapy, which makes your hair fall out, makes you feel unwell, and it makes you sick. But they do have effects that we have to learn how to control.
And I suppose it is sort of suck it and see, so that because we're very much at the beginning of this journey, that we're learning all the time the dosaging that we need to give, the length of the course, the duration of that course, indeed whether you need to follow up, how often you need to follow up.
That's right. And this is a phase 2 trial that we've just heard being reported. A phase 1 trial is working out the dose of the anti-cancer drug. So how far can you go to get the best effect and yet reduce the toxicity of the drug? A phase 2 is exactly this, looking for responses across a range of cancers. And phase 3 is when it goes into trial against the best available treatment. There isn't much available for bile duct cancer other than chemotherapy, which works in only about 40% of patients. So it should be that this combination of drugs will be going into a phase 3 trial internationally, and then it will be licensed to be used for everybody.
It's absolutely brilliant news. Thank you very much indeed, Carol, for joining me. And may I wish you a very happy new year. That's Professor Carol Sikora, former head of the WHO Cancer Programme and Dean of Medicine at the University of Buckingham. It's an extraordinary story.
It's a fantastic story, and as I say, taking the bad stuff off the headlines and focusing on some of the good stuff. We had a transplant this year, didn't we? A heart transplant from a genetically modified pig.
Yes.
On that sort of stuff. AI is going tremendous guns in terms of that.
Well, I think for me the key here is about the cellular level of this medicine. We're now dealing with immune mechanisms. Before, it was a bit like hitting a tumour with a brick.
Right.
Now it's using small darts.
Yes.
It's almost of that sort of level, but we know we can interfere on the molecular level, and that changes your outcome, as you've seen. Those tumours shrank.
Oh, no, it's phenomenal. Great stories. But people have just discovered the 100% now, basically, of the human genome, haven't they?
Yeah.
So you look at that sort of stuff, which gives you the recipe. That's the DNA, where you can identify diseases and eliminate them. We're in a really good position, I think, from a medical point of view.
But what's interesting about this particular story, I must say, is that Mr. Klim, once all of this happened, he had surgery and they removed the dead tumour in the end. And he also went on to say something really important, which is that it made him realise the sanctity of life.
Right.
And he's changed his own behaviour. He's lost weight. He now eats healthily. He realises that actually every day he's on this planet is a great day.
Yeah, and talking about celebrating life, that's exactly the message that we should have. Advances in technology, advances in medicine, phenomenal. Celebrate life. You get your one moment. This is like Scrooge at Christmas, if you like. You turn around and say, this is what your life could have been like. You turn around and make a difference. It's a Wonderful Life, the best movie ever. Has it got exactly that message? And this is a real life story on that basis.
It does indeed. And Andrew, thank you very much indeed. After the break, we'll be talking about UK markets and how they'll respond in 2023 to what can be described as a very turbulent year. This is Talk TV.
To those who don't like you, there's people out there that don't like you. I know you said recently that you were very popular, and I think you said you were the most honest man in the world last week.
I'm a very honest man.
Was that true?
Yeah, I think I'm a very honest man. That's
but
true.
to those who don't like you...
Much more honest than you, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm pretty honest.
Because I don't think you're real.
Really?
But, yeah, I think I'm a much more honest person in most ways, in most respects.
Why am I not real?
But we're not going to get into that. Let's finish up the interview. Go ahead.
Go
ahead.
My question was this. What message do you have to people who can't think of anything worse than you running again and will be distressed about it. Would you come back with all the experience?
So there are so many moving parts. We've got...
Go ahead.
Just, you say it's coming.
By 2% next year.
So we're obviously talking a great deal about the thing. I'm really...
Murphy, as we discuss a royal Christmas.
Two icons, actually, who've...
The main public moment for the day comes for the 11 a.m. service at St Mary Magdalene Church. As you say, you've been there many times, I've been there many times. It's a really lovely atmosphere, isn't it?
Yes, the gate's open, the public can flock in, the cafe's open, everyone's standing around having
very important.
A cup of tea or a coffee and a mince pie. And then there, because it's actually one of the times you get the closest to members of the royal family, isn't it?
It's true, and it feels very relaxed and very informal. I think everyone's in good spirits. It's Christmas Day. There is obviously a police presence and security there, but you do feel, as members of the public, do feel they can get very close to the royals. They come out of the gates of Sandringham House and walk past the public to go to the 11 a.m. service, but it's not until they come out on the way back that they...
Jeremy Kyle Live will absolutely be that. There'll be a lot of audience participation, which is going to be something very new. It's just going to be that background stuff that's opinionated but gives people a chance to be involved.
Well, a very good morning to you. It is Friday, the 30th of December, and you're watching Breakfast with me, David Bull, here on Talk TV, broadcasting live from the Talk Radio studios. The headlines at 8 o'clock. Pele has been described by Sir Bobby Charlton as a truly magical footballer and a wonderful human being, following the Brazil legend's death, aged 82. His country has announced 3 days of mourning. British fashion designer Dame Vivienne Westwood has died at the age of 81. She found fame in the 1970s when she brought punk fashion into the mainstream and went on to establish a global brand. A court in Myanmar has added another 7 years to the sentence of deposed leader Aung San Suu Kyi on corruption charges. The 77-year-old is now due to serve a total of 33 years in prison. And the government is being urged to intervene in the cost of living crisis before it worsens in 2023. Research by the Resolution Foundation has found that next year people on lower incomes could face intensified financial issues. The time is 1 minute past 8, and this is Talk TV. Well, thank you very much indeed for your company this morning, Friday, December the 30th. We've been talking this morning about these two legends, two icons, actually, who've died. Pele at the age of 82, and, of course, Dame Vivienne Westwood as well at the age of 81. Really extraordinary characters who contributed really so much, and many tributes pouring into both of those, and quite rightly so. And also, we've been talking about the fact that this year we've lost a lot of people, very well-known, famous people who've contributed to this country and indeed to the world as well. And I was just wondering, which of these famous people, of these deaths, do you mourn the most? Which of these do you think is the biggest tragedy? I mean, they're all tragedies in their own way, but I'm just wondering which of those had the most impact on you. Which of those do you mourn the most? The number 0344 499 1000. Text the word talk in your message to 87222. You can tweet us at Talk TV and tweet me at Dr. David Bull. Just to give you some inspiration, for me, probably it is Queen Elizabeth, because, of course, I haven't ever known another monarch until now, until King Charles. And it does seem strange she is no longer with us. I would also put into that Dame Olivia Newton-John, Angela Lansbury, also people that I knew personally, like Lionel Blair and Barry Cryer, people like John Challis, great entertainment legends, people that were a great pleasure to spend time with and to have a laugh with and a joke with as well, and people like Bernard Cribbins. So we've lost some real icons, actually. Let me know which of those you think is the greatest loss to this country and to you. I'm really keen to hear from you. But let's talk more now about Vivienne Westwood. I'm joined by Andrew Eborn, who's a futurist and broadcaster and barrister and many other things as well. Good morning.
Good morning again, David. It's a joy to be here.
It's lovely to have you as well. And obviously we're talking about Vivienne Westwood. I'm delighted to say that Harriet Walker, who's fashion editor at The Times, joins us now. Good morning.
Hi there.
Hi. So Vivienne Westwood, we've been talking about, and actually Andrew is very knowledgeable on Vivienne Westwood, which I was surprised by this morning. I mean, clearly all of these tributes are being poured into her, and people calling her the undisputed queen of British fashion. She died peacefully and surrounded by her family in London. And she really was quite a character, and we've been talking about that she was really quite a maverick, the way that she set up her business. She was originally a teacher. She then, with Malcolm McLaren, set up her shop. It certainly wasn't a normal trading arrangement, let's put it this way. But let's talk about the fashion that she inspired, and certainly the history and the legacy of that fashion.
Well, I think she's singular among many fashion designers in that she wasn't just creating clothes. She created a real sort of cultural moment that impacted on the way we still view our country now. She was incredibly outspoken and rebellious at a time when the establishment very much ruled the roost. The punk designs that she put out in the 70s, they really took aim at the people in charge, and they really spoke to a generation of disillusioned, cross young people. Her Vivienne Westwood's partner, Malcolm McLaren, was the manager of the Sex Pistols as well, and so she was really involved in creating that kind of iconoclastic look that really shook the core of Britain, I think, in its day.
I mean, she was an anarchist in many ways, and I think she was also a counterculture in many ways. She had a very strong link to punk, as you said. Mm-hmm. How was that received at the time? I suppose society was a little more buttoned up then.
Oh, without doubt. I think people were absolutely outraged by her at the time. As I say, that the youth culture absolutely took her to its bosom, and she became a real figurehead for a kind of burgeoning youth movement that was trying to change things for the better, and that's something she took with her throughout her career to various causes. But I think also she was a real kind of a wake-up call for Britain. She was a very outspoken northern working-class woman who had a lot of opinions, and that was incredibly refreshing at the time she burst onto the scene. There were not very many people like her at all.
Well, I mean, in many ways, she was a revolutionary, wasn't she? She wanted to be outspoken. She wanted to change the world. She wanted to put her mark on this planet.
Absolutely, yeah, and she took that message with her. I think she's one of those, it's a cliche to say, but she was an iconoclast who became a national treasure, actually, because she was so far ahead of her time on many points that we're all still sort of catching up with her. And she was one of the first people to dress female bodies, and curves properly. That's why she became such a commercial success once people had sort of seen beyond the sort of propaganda T-shirts at the very beginning. And one of her more recent causes, again, really ahead of her time, was she was around at the very birth of climate activism in the early noughties. She was one of the first fashion designers to say, and this really is revolutionary, to say, stop buying things, buy less, choose well, make it last. That was her motto. And in an industry motivated by sales, that really is quite a great thing to say.
It's incredibly counterintuitive, isn't it?
Absolutely, but I think it's a message that many of us, especially post-pandemic, post-lockdown, are really coming around to now. Don't buy things you don't need. And she's really been banging that drum for a long time.
And just in terms of her methodology there, she obviously wanted to be a bad girl of fashion. Did she succeed? Because in the end, I suppose, she became establishment.
She did, but I think perhaps, I think she enjoyed being assimilated as well. And there was always that very knowing take on British heritage and British culture and the kind of stuffy upper-class traditions. She loved poking fun at that, but I think she had a deep affection for kind of British design DNA. That was just part of her label. She really boosted lots of homegrown textile mills like Harris Tweed, and she really flew the flag, literally flew the flag. She used the Union Jack in so many pieces all around the world.
And certainly with the tributes pouring in, I've just been reading that Boy George has sent a tribute, also the actress Kim Cantrell. Claudia Schiffer has also written a really moving tribute, actually, saying she was a unique voice, irreplaceable, and will be missed. And, of course, Billy Idol, someone that I grew up listening to, tweeted, "It will take a long time for me to take this in." So she touched so many people's lives.
She absolutely did, and I think it's a real testament to what she was doing and how she did it and what her messaging was, how progressive she was, that she, in recent years as well, has become a real cultural icon among kind of Gen Z shoppers, 20-somethings, who are trawling vintage sites to find those original pieces and paying often huge, through the nose for them. I think she speaks still to that vein of youth culture, which is, slightly disillusioned, a bit fed up, wants to make a point.
Yeah. Well, she will be sadly missed. Thank you very much indeed, Harriet. Very good to speak to you. That's Harriet Walker, who's fashion editor at the Times. So the other death, of course, that we're talking about is Pele, who has died at the age of 82, the Brazilian legend, widely regarded as the greatest footballer ever to have lived, following what can only be described, really, as an incredible career. The only player ever to have won the World Cup 3 times, including at the age of just 17, which seems absolutely extraordinary. Well, joining us now is Toby Giles, who is TalkSport reporter. Good morning.
Good morning.
Really sad day again. I mean, obviously he lived to a good age, 82, but obviously Brazil is saying these are days of mourning.
Absolutely, yeah. 3 days of official mourning for the country. The Brazilian Football Confederation has announced 7 days of mourning. He is well-loved, well beyond the world of football, particularly in Brazil, where he was so on top of social issues. He is a figurehead for black people in Brazil. And, you know, in 1958, at a time when it was not easy in Brazil, at just 17, he became this global icon who seemed to understand, and maybe as the first footballer to understand, that as a sports person, you could be more than just that. You could offer more to the world.
And what drove him?
Well, talent. There's absolutely no doubt about that. It was innate. He was a Christian who spoke about God at every opportunity, really, and his God-given gift. An extraordinary desire for family. He spoke to his father, who was devastated when Brazil lost in the 1950 World Cup. So what's that, 8 years before he finally won it himself. So he would have been 9, and his dad said, I'm really struggling to deal with this. Brazil have lost in this latest World Cup. And at the age of 9, he said, don't worry, father, I will win us a World Cup. At the age of 9. Yeah. Only 8 years later, he won one, and then he went on to win 2 more as well. So no doubt that family was very important, and he also felt that Brazilians were his family. So it was a desire to please everyone.
That's extraordinary, isn't it, Andrew?
Oh, absolutely.
The fact is that this is a man who obviously was so passionate about the sport, but his country and actually success, and I suppose that desperate urge to actually achieve his goals.
Well, it was very upsetting, as you talk. He was 9 when, and actually his father was in tears. And he thought, what on earth is going on here if you can get so passionate about a sport? And so that's what drove him. And he was incredibly talented. When you look at all the records, 3 World Cups that he did. I should ask you, as a sporting correspondent, though, they always talk about the GOAT, the greatest of all time. Yes. I've got it. And they always talk about Maradona and Messi. We had some brilliant viewers writing in about George Best. Who's the GOAT for you?
I've thought about this a lot today, because it was only... What is it, 12 days since Messi finally won that World Cup, that everyone's been going, oh, he's finally achieved the thing that makes him the GOAT, if you want to have that conversation. And it's very difficult for someone who isn't old enough to have watched Pele play on a regular basis, and from whom there's not an awful lot of television footage,
there's no footage
to make that call. But what I think has struck me about this is a man who transformed football on his own. He came up with the phrase "o jogo bonito," which means the beautiful game. And
you said that so well. What was it?
It was him that used that phrase.
I had no idea.
Absolutely, created the phrase "the beautiful game."
Oh, really?
Say it again. You did it so well. O jogo bonito.
Thank you.
And he it feels like that was not just sort of a motto for him to say, but a rule for him to live by. Yeah. There are 3 moments in the 1970 World Cup, his last World Cup, which, you know, that Brazil team is quite astonishing, it has to be said, where it sort of defined him in some ways, and yet those 3 moments, none of them resulted in goals. Yeah. So there's the infamous Gordon Banks save, the very famous Gordon Banks save from Pele's header. There's the effort against Czechoslovakia from the halfway line, which is sort of, you know, talked about in this legendary... I mean, we've seen people like... I support Watford, and a Watford player scored from the halfway line earlier this season. But nobody will talk about that as much as they talk about Pele, who missed. He didn't actually score. Yeah. And then there's this bamboozling moment in the semi-finals against Uruguay, where the goalkeeper just looks totally bereft of understanding what's just happened, and yet Pele does not score. And those three moments symbolise in some ways what it was all about for Pele. It's art, it's entertainment, and actually, you know, if it results in a goal, great, but actually he saw football as a far greater thing than just winning, in spite of all his winningness.
He was the first superstar, wasn't he?
Without a doubt.
Football.
Well, there's a great comment here as well. Before Pele, football was just a sport. Pele changed it all. He turned football into art and into entertainment.
Neymar, who's the only male player to have scored as many goals as him for Brazil. He will, no doubt, you know, he needs one more to overtake him. He will not lace Pele's boots in anyone's mind,
so
with
just
the
tell me,
exception of that record.
What has Pele's legacy done for Brazil?
It's quite simply, certainly from a sporting point of view, made them the most feared nation to play in football. There's absolutely no doubt about that. That famous yellow jersey, you come up against it and a lot of teams are beaten already. You know, it's a bit like in England playing Liverpool of the 80s or Man United of the 90s and 2000s. You can come up against them and go, we've got absolutely no chance. Even if they're not at their best, even if they've got injuries galore, there's something mental now about playing Brazil, and it all stems from Pele.
No, you're absolutely right. I also, what I love is that a lot of places around the world are celebrating him. So the arches at Wembley have now got the yellow and green colour to celebrate him, I think, around the world. He also patched up his differences, didn't he, with Maradona?
The two of them, I mean, you know, we all talk about them, don't we, as the two greatest of all time. Argentina and Brazil's history combined, I mean, how long have you got? So it's inevitable that there were going to be some difficulties. But he, on and off the pitch, was a friend to all. Yes. And there was a respect for anyone that made a career out of football. And whether you know, liked what Maradona represented off the pitch, which some people perhaps do not, Pele was always able to appreciate someone with that level of talent. And as far as I'm aware, he never got involved in the sort of greatest of all time debate. Whether that's because secretly he thought that it was him and it didn't really matter,
why bother
it's
when you
moot.
are the greatest,
or whether, and I suspect this is more likely, it was more about modesty. You know, it was not something that you ever heard him want to discuss.
He did strike me as a very modest man. I mean, some of them are out there and in your face. He seemed quite reserved on that sort of basis.
I mean, God-fearing, so perhaps that's inevitable. But certainly, I think...
Well, Maradona's the hand of God, so you could work on that principle.
Yes, I'm not totally sure that had Pele scored such a goal, I feel like he might have been much more honest about it.
Yes,
perhaps England would have won one more World Cup had that been Pele rather than Maradona.
What an extraordinary man, what a legend, and thank you so much for coming in. Toby, I pronounced your name incorrectly.
That's all right,
isn't it?
It does happen.
Reporter, thank you very much indeed for coming in to fill us in on the latest news there about Pele as well. Lots more still to come as well. So we want to take a slightly different tack now. I want to talk also about a story that I think is really important, and that is about the flu jab. In fact, uptake amongst NHS staff is now the lowest for a decade. There are real concerns about that because, of course, having the flu jab means that NHS staff stay working within the service. Also, it means they're less likely to pass it on to their patients that they are treating. And at the moment, we have a lot of vulnerable elderly people in hospital, so it's really important. And I want to understand why the flu jab uptake is lowest amongst the NHS staff than it has been for a decade. I'll be talking to Dr. Lawrence Gurlis, who is a GP from Same Day Doctor. And then another fascinating story, which is that in Dover, the Border Force official, or one of them, has been arrested because he is an illegal immigrant. You couldn't make it up. This is Talk TV.
Hello and welcome to the Royalty Extra, where we take a closer look under the hood of the royal carriage. Joining me now is Victoria Murphy as we discuss a royal Christmas. Hi, Victoria.
Hi.
So this is going to be itself.
I feel that people should be...
But the main public moment for the day comes for the 11 a.m. service at St Mary Magdalene Church. As you say, you've been there many times, I've been there many times. It's a really lovely atmosphere, isn't it?
Yes, the gate's open, the public can flock in, the cafe's open, everyone's standing around having
very important.
a cup of tea or a coffee and a mince pie. And then there, because it's actually one of the times you get the closest to members of the royal family, isn't it?
It's true, and it feels very relaxed and very informal. I think everyone's in good spirits. It's Christmas Day. There is obviously a police presence and security there, but you do feel, as members of the public, do feel they can get very close to the royals. They come out of the gates of Sandringham House and walk past the public to go to the 11 a.m. service, but it's not until they come out on the way back that they
Welcome back to Talk TV Breakfast. The time is 8:20 on Friday, December the 30th. Thank you very much indeed for your company and all your messages. This one from Newsmonger. Good morning, Dr. David. I'm concerned about the fact the electricity pricing is tied to the price of gas. This is clearly wrong and must be changed, as I feel the British public is being ripped off, and I feel that people should be made aware of it. Now, it's really interesting you say that, because we've covered it over the last few mornings as well, and I totally agree. People simply do not understand that concept, and I think it has to change, and I don't know why it isn't changing. And the number of people I've talked to in the energy industry, in government, and no one has done anything about it. And as a result, of course, we're paying these ridiculously sky-high energy prices, and people are really struggling. But it's a great comment. Thank you very much indeed. This one says, John in Lincolnshire says, Vivienne Westwood was born at the same time as me. How lucky we are to have lived through the Elizabethan era. Risk and flair as its symbol. I like that, Andrew.
I love risk and flair as its symbol.
Risk and flair.
It's wonderful. What I also loved about Vivienne as well, just on that, I mean, she lived in an ex-council house in Nightingale Lane in Clapham for 30 years, until her now husband, Andreas, persuaded her to move. So, and she used to cycle around. People who live in Clapham would often see Vivienne on her bicycle. So, an iconic figure who was basically didn't let fame change her at all.
So what really drove her? Was it actually the fashion side of it, or was it actually the change and the campaigning and being a social voice, a voice of social conscience?
I think she's absolutely a catalyst for change. The world is a much better place with a Vivienne
But I wonder which came first. Was it the fashion that was used as a tool to change things?
Well, she says in her book that's what they do use, the fashion as that sort of voice about the energy at that sort of time in the 70s, when it first the catalyst, if you like, for the punk movement. It was all about that, about anarchy and that sort of embracing that side. So it was, and basically the fashion was the voice, if you like. So she worked on that sort of basis. But it's interesting, in her massive book, almost 500 pages, she only spends one page talking about punk. And the whole sort of thing, so it's one page out of the 478. It's all about the future, so nostalgia ain't what it used to be.
Well, right.
So she worked on that basis. It's all about the activism, the great things she did for climate change, talking about Julian Assange and the rights of freedom of speech. So she used her public persona to basically shine a spotlight on issues.
Well, she was very complicated and multifaceted, really, I think we can surmise from all of that.
And she went through ridicule at one stage. There were the talk shows and footage out there where she would come on with her creations, people would laugh, and it was upsetting.
Yes. Let's move on and talk about something else now, which is the flu jab. Of course, many people are being invited to have their flu jabs, which we have every single year. And the headline that worries me a great deal is only 4 in 10 frontline NHS staff have actually had a flu vaccine. That's the lowest uptake in a decade. Despite begging, obviously, the vulnerable to have their flu jab, it seems the NHS staff are not actually taking their own advice. So frontline medics, such as doctors and nurses, are offered the vaccine for free every year, and the reason for that is it's to stop them spreading the virus to vulnerable people that they encounter at work, particularly the elderly and particularly people who are suffering from cancer. And hospitals are wondering and very concerned about whether they are going to face what they are calling a flu-nami, because we are seeing the infectious virus has actually hospitalised nearly 60 times more people this year than last winter. So the question is, why on earth are the NHS staff not actually having this vaccine? And the reason that these vaccines are important is because they help reduce the chances of the staff being ill. That means they don't have to take time off work. And secondly, is to protect patients. Now, the NHS England data shows that an average of 1,939 people with flu were in hospital each day last week. That is up 67% on the 1,000 odd that were recorded the previous week, and 57 times higher than the 34 recorded at the same point in 2021. So what does that tell us? It means flu admissions are going up. It means the elderly and vulnerable are at high risk, and we know that NHS staff are not having their flu jabs. The question is, why? Joining me now is Dr. Lawrence Gurlis, who is a GP from Same Day Doctor. Lawrence, always very good to talk to you.
You too, David.
You know, look, as someone who used to work in a hospital, I have a flu jab every single year, and I think it's important that we explain that flu changes every single year, the makeup of it changes, and so it's important to get immunised. Why do you think it is that NHS staff have shunned it?
I think there are two major factors here, David. Firstly, it's not really fair to compare this year with last year, because for the last 2 winters we've seen no flu at all because of lockdown.
Indeed.
And I think that has caused a little bit of complacency. And if you look back 6-9 months ago on this station, we predicted there'd be a flu epidemic this year because people would come out of lockdown and they're less likely to get vaccinated. The other factor that is clearly operating is vaccine hesitancy because of a certain amount of controversy about COVID vaccines. And I think that is spilling over into cynicism about vaccines in general. The singer Cher posted on social media yesterday that she has flu, she hadn't had a vaccine, and she's regretted it. And she blamed the anti-vax movement for the reason that she didn't have the vaccine. And I think, as you will know, that a lot of the cynicism is actually stronger among healthcare workers than among the general public. So I'm quite sure that is a factor that's operating here for the healthcare workers not being vaccinated.
Well, obviously, I completely understand the vaccine fatigue, but there is a very big difference between the flu vaccine, which is tried and tested technology, which we've used for a very long time, and some of the COVID vaccines, which is the ones that you're alluding to, particularly the mRNA vaccines. So just in terms of the flu vaccine, the other difference I would have thought, though, that's really important here, Lawrence, is that even if you're vaccinated for COVID, you can still spread it. Now, the whole point with the flu vaccine is it does protect patients.
Yes, we've got years of experience with a tried and tested vaccine, and it does stop you catching the flu and it stops you spreading it. So it's a completely different situation, as you say, compared with the COVID vaccine. So I would encourage people to get a flu vaccine. I did have a patient come in to me yesterday who said he went to his local pharmacy and they've run out. So I'm not sure what the supply issue is like. Hopefully healthcare staff can access the vaccine. We are seeing a huge amount of flu at the moment, along with coughs, colds, sinusitis, a certain amount of COVID as well, chicken pox, which normally doesn't come up this time of year. So it's been a nightmare. I've just worked 10 days straight. This is my first morning off for a long time, and I'm back at the coalface again tomorrow. So it's been really, really tough. There's a lot of flu around. For that reason, I would encourage people to get the vaccine. And the other point is that one of the problems affecting the health service is staff sickness absence. That just adds to the pressures that they're struggling with at the moment.
Just in terms of offering the flu vaccine, of course, there are certain groups that can get it free, those over 50, those pregnant, high-risk diseases such as diabetes, heart disease and so on, epilepsy. It's really important also that we send the message to people who are at high risk that they should also get the flu vaccine.
Very much so, yes. I mean, any respiratory illness in a high-risk person is much more likely to give a secondary bacterial infection, bronchitis and pneumonia, and the flu itself can be fatal, and we know that. You can be overwhelmed with viral pneumonia. You don't even have to have a bacterial infection. So vulnerable people must be vaccinated. We strongly encourage them to do that.
Can I just put this message to you, and I get this a lot. This is from Gary Shotton, who says, "Good morning, David. My neighbour has had his latest flu jab, and he has been unwell for a month since having it. He says he will never have another one. There is no cause and effect here. It is a deactivated vaccine, isn't it?"
Yeah, I hear this every year, people saying, I had the vaccine and caught the flu straight afterwards.
Well, you can't.
No, you can't. You can get a slightly sore arm from the vaccine. People can take some paracetamol. You might get a very, very mild fever. But no, you can't catch the flu, and very, very unlikely that it can cause a month's illness. But look, to some extent, I understand, because we have been overloaded with messages about vaccines for a very long time. So I understand some of the cynicism, but please, I encourage people to get the flu jab. Also,
there's one other thing that I think is a confounding variable here, which is that some people, and this one comes in from Archie Morden, who says, David, I thought, great show as usual, thank you very much indeed, isn't the COVID vaccine actually included in the flu jab? And I think this is where people are getting really confused, because, of course, at the moment the NHS is offering COVID vaccines in one arm, the flu vaccine in another arm. Now, I went and had my flu jab, and I didn't have my COVID vaccine because I didn't want it. So you're certainly at liberty to choose just to have flu.
Certainly, yeah, there was talk about a year ago of combining the two, and I think that's maybe where the confusion has come in, but that has not happened. They are separate vaccines entirely.
And just one more thing, and maybe a little bit of a maverick question. Do you think we should mandate healthcare workers to have flu jabs?
Well, every year I have my appraisal. My appraiser insists that I have a flu jab. We know that with the COVID vaccine, there was a lot of distress over mandating vaccines. I think we should consider it, but at the end of the day, there has to be an element of personal choice. I'm not in favour of a big government telling people what to do. I think we should encourage people to do the right thing.
Lawrence, very good to talk to you. Happy New Year to you as well. That's Lawrence Gurlis, who is a GP from Same Day Doctor. I just want to pick up on one more message here from Ron Hutch. David, it is a blatant lie to say the flu jab prevents you from getting flu. My wife was ill with flu for 2 years after getting the jab and ill again 2 months later. So you are lying. So is your guest. Let me just explain how this works. So every single year it is a best guess. So when flu emerges at certain parts of the world, they do a best guess, and that is what is the basis of that vaccine. So by having that vaccine, it's essentially a probability game. No, it doesn't stop you getting it, but your chances of getting it are far reduced, and that is what we're talking about here. And therefore, for NHS staff, it actually stops you becoming ill, and that means that you have to take less time off work, but it also protects your patients as well. So I don't think we are lying, but thank you very much indeed for your message. Right, after the break, we'll be talking about something completely different. Obviously, we know there's a Channel migrant problem. We know that Border Force have been on strike. Well, this is an extraordinary story. One Border Force official has been arrested because he is an illegal migrant. This is Talk TV.
Join me, Ian Collins, every day on Talk TV.
There is nothing we hate more than hypocrisy.
Discussing the big issues.
Why was it so hard to establish the deputy leader was at a meeting with her colleagues?
The callers.
Alan in Grimsby. Tracy in Burton-on-Trent. Dave, thank you very much.
Picking apart the big stuff.
This simply does not wash. Look who's back under the spotlight.
Welcome back to Talk TV. So do you want to ask me that question again, Anne?
Yeah, so basically, categorically, a lot of people, the Twitter sphere is in meltdown, isn't it?
Well, yes, so I've just had another one saying that actually this isn't right. The gentleman providing misinformation on the flu vaccine. Every year the flu changes and it mutates. Taking the same vaccine yearly will not prevent it against new strains of flu. This isn't debatable. No, but the point I'm making is every year it is a new vaccine.
Yes, and that's what you're saying. So this is what we're doing. There's a lot of misinformation. Everybody becomes an expert. We should listen to the doctors, those in the know, and get those categorically so we can make an informed decision.
Indeed. So here's the problem.
Yes.
With COVID, of course, a lot of people are reticent with the COVID jabs. I think there's been a lot of misinformation. We know that obviously it was rolled out under extraordinary circumstances and there are side effects to those vaccines. And I've been very open and honest about that. Now, the flu vaccine is a completely different kettle of fish because, of course, it's been around a long time. It's a completely different technology. So every year the flu virus changes. If it changes a little bit, it's called antigenic drift.
Right.
If it changes massively, you get antigenic shift.
Okay.
And that's when you get a pandemic. So normally it's an antigenic drift, so that every single year the scientists, the clever scientists, sit down and work out a best guess for that vaccine for the year, and that is the one that is rolled out.
So in very simple terms, this is what your guest
Did that make sense?
No, it absolutely makes sense. Yeah. And I love this because you're a doctor and we can listen to doctors. Very simple terms. If you have a flu jab,
yes,
can you catch the flu?
Yes, you can, but your risk is much lower.
OK, perfect. Thank you, Doctor.
Good. I'm glad we cleared that up. Right, let's move on, shall we? This is an extraordinary story which is about a Border Force official. In fact, a Border Force official has been arrested for being an illegal migrant. He was arrested on suspicion of immigration offences whilst working for the Home Office agency. Wait for this, in charge of securing the country's perimeter. And the case has been brought to light at a time when obviously ministers are scrambling to try and sort out the illegal migration problem. 45,000 people illegally arriving in the UK on small boats alone this year. Now, it seems that this man in his late 30s arrived in the UK about 20 years ago.
20 years ago.
And he came in from the Balkans. He lied about the country of origin, and I think he said he was Kosovan, from what I understand, but he was actually Albanian. How history repeats itself.
Absolutely.
But of course, he won the right to remain in the UK, and then passed basic employment and criminal record checks, and then got a job with Border Force. And I find that absolutely extraordinary. Joining us now is Danny Shaw, Home Affairs commentator. Good morning to you.
Good morning, David.
Well, this is embarrassing.
It's an extraordinary case. I mean, we have to be a little bit careful, David, because the man has been arrested and an investigation is going on. So we have to be just a little bit aware of that. But if the facts that are reported first by The Sun are correct, it would appear to be extraordinary how anyone could escape the sort of checks that you would have thought would have to be the most rigorous checks to work for Border Force. And immigration checks, you would have thought, would be absolutely top of their list. Just to provide a bit of background about this, this was an investigation conducted by the Home Office's Anti-Corruption Command. They were focusing on Western Jetfoil. That's the sort of base where people who come across the channel in small boats are taken to initially for the first stage of the processing. That's the migration centre in Dover. This individual was one of 4 Home Office staff who were arrested 3 weeks ago. They were arrested on suspicion of misconduct and conspiracy to steal as part of a wide-ranging investigation. And then it emerged that one of the individuals had in fact been arrested previously for the immigration offences which you have outlined just a couple of moments ago.
I mean, it really is extraordinary, and it goes back to the question I asked yesterday, given Border Force are on strike, and the armed forces are doing a sterling job at the airports. And I asked yesterday, and I asked the great British public, who would you prefer to man the borders? Would you prefer the armed forces, or would you prefer Border Force? And overwhelmingly, guess what they said? The armed forces. And so these sort of stories are really not going to help in terms of the public actually having confidence in the Border Force.
Yes, and I suppose you do have to wonder, is it just a coincidence that this story has emerged in the papers right in the middle of a strike, which has become very politicised?
Oh, that's good.
We talked about this.
Sorry, carry on.
Yep, absolutely. You know, whether the government is, managing to sort of...
So you're saying the government may be briefing against Border Force? Just as Border Force was briefing against the government yesterday, saying the borders are porous?
I'm sure there's always some briefing going on in a situation like this, where you have got 1,000 members of the PCS union on strike at 6 airports in the port of New Haven. The strike's still going on at the moment. In that situation, you have intense focus on Border Force, what their officials are like, and I think it would be some coincidence if this story just emerged right in the middle of it by happenstance. So I think there may have been a bit of briefing going on, particularly given the fact that these arrests came some 3 weeks ago.
I mean, it's extraordinary. Let's bring in the barrister. What do you make of this?
Well, I think you're right. And this has been a theme, hasn't it, about question everything. And you've got to work out the timing.
Yeah.
That's what Vivienne would say. You always question everything. Don't accept your first thing. But Danny's right. You have to also remember that it's innocent until proven guilty. So go through the process and see if that's right. If it is right, then obviously it's of concern. What you have to ask is, why is it coming out now? And I think absolutely absolutely one conclusion could be that people are briefing these sort of stories in the same way as we've got other stories about the army being far more efficient and so on and so forth.
Well, that's what people have said.
Yes.
I mean, that is the extraordinary thing, Danny, that people have said, and I was talking to Simon Calder yesterday and also many people coming back into the country saying they literally skipped through the borders, they had a lovely time, and many people then messaged to say, can we have the armed forces the whole time?
But is that because the army, as we're being told, or some members of armed forces personnel are not permitted to carry out all the security checks?
Well, I got to the bottom of that yesterday.
There we go. Let's clarify this.
No, well, so I got to the bottom of this yesterday. If the armed forces suspect someone, they themselves cannot detain someone under an IS-81. However, there are Border Force officials there, so they go to them, they issue the IS-81, and so therefore they're not actually circumventing those checks.
Yes, well, that could be the case. I mean, the other...
Well, it is the case, is what they're saying, isn't it?
That is what I heard from a retired colonel yesterday.
We have to dispel these myths. Can you tell a lie often enough, it becomes the truth. So I think the reality, if it's an issue, let's address it. If it's not, and you've got the answer to that, let's not keep peddling the misinformation.
I mean, Danny, it makes the other interesting point that came out yesterday was that when you compare us with other European countries, many of them use armed forces at the borders. Do you think there is an appetite amongst the public to actually beef up the border force by using members of the armed forces permanently?
I am sure members of the public, I mean, I myself, would be great to see, you know, a soldier at the border processing your papers and providing that reassurance that, you know, someone in uniform does provide. However, I don't think that the Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, would be happy if the men and women of the Army, Navy and the Air Force was stuck at passport control. That's not really what they're being trained to do.
No, I think you have a very fair point indeed. Danny, thank you very much indeed for your time. That's Danny Shaw, who's Home Affairs commentator. I don't know about you, Andrew. I actually would quite like to see squaddies at the border alongside Border Force. I think also in terms of acting as a deterrent, it would give the right sort of ethos, I think it would show that we mean business.
And we both travel extensively, and you go to different countries, and actually there's a balance, because some people, you've got armed officers walking around with their machine guns and so on and so forth in certain territories, where it can be quite threatening and intimidating. What we have to always work at is the mischief you're trying to guard against. And does this make it more efficient because they're not doing their job? Well, you've dispelled that myth. Is it more efficient because people are making sure they get their passport and putting it in the right sort of way, and smoothing that sort of issue? What I always think we have to do is justify what is the issue, here's the solution, and this is a more efficient way of doing things. And if we keep looking at that sort of basis, then absolutely there is that comfort from having somebody there.
I mean, it is extraordinary, actually. I think Border Force have realised that actually their strike isn't going very well.
But what I love, and this is what I love about today's show, it's making everybody question everything.
Yes.
So if we turn around and say, well, hang on, why is that story coming out about, oh, this person's a legal immigrant, and why is this story coming out about, oh, we can't really enforce our laws? You suddenly work out there's a whole media spin about it. Yeah. So the sultans of spin, as Dire Straits would tell you. Work on that sort of basis. That'll be the message from today's show. We're correcting all these misunderstandings, but we're also questioning everything.
We certainly are, and we'll question anything that you want to throw at us after this break. So it's time for all of your calls, your thoughts and your stories after this next break. This is Talk TV.
To those who don't like you, there's people out there that don't like you. I know you said recently that you were very popular, and I think you said you were the most honest man in the world last week.
I'm a very honest man.
Was that true?
Yeah, I think I'm a very honest man. That's
but to those who don't like you...
Much more honest than you, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm pretty honest.
Because I don't think you're real.
Really?
But, yeah, I think I'm a much more honest person in most ways, in most respects.
Why am I not real?
But we're not going to get into that. Let's finish up the interview. Go ahead.
No,
go ahead.
My question was this. What message do you have to people who can't think of anything worse than you running again and will be distressed about it? Would you come back with all the experience you've had of being president? Would you come back a different person? Would you do things a bit differently? Do you believe you can win this war?
Yes.
No question.
And I don't only believe it, I know it will happen. We will win. He can occupy these towns and villages, but all of them would be destroyed. because without ruining them, they will not be able to take those places.
He's an inspirational leader, and the way the Ukrainian people have come together in these terrible times. I mean, like you say, we've never seen a sovereign nation invaded by a hostile foreign nation since World War II.
Cristiano, let me start just by asking you, why are you doing this interview?
Because I think it's the time to say something. And because I like you. As simple as that.
Well, don't say that in public. How many times a day do you get told to tell people to F off?
All the time.
Like a dozen times a day?
I was at the Scottish BAFTAs last night, and I couldn't get away from people. And of course, it's, as I said before, it's the best thing to tell people.
Yes.
Because when you're fed up with them, you go, oh, fuck. You know.
You can say it, we'll bleep you.
Oh, don't bother me anymore, just the
You know what? I'm not going to watch what I say, Tyson, because I don't think you do either, really. I think that both of us, have the self-confidence to say, you know what, stuff this nonsense. Stuff the fun police, as Shane Warne, my great friend, used to say. Because I think it's just what it does, it removes all the fun out of life. It makes life a very joyless kind of experience, doesn't it?
I don't know what's going on in the world. Everybody's upset for something. And no matter what you say, can't please everybody. But for me, the only person I'm interested in pleasing is my wife, and I'm struggling with that most of the time.
I can't play like that because my wife gets mad. My wife gets so mad when I'm playing. She doesn't like my sense of humor.
Well, your wife
She's always thinking I'm going to get cancelled or something.
You boasted openly of having 6, 7 partners at once. So is that righteous? I'm not taking there's no moral view from me. So
Welcome back to Breakfast here on Talk TV with me, David Bull. The time, 8:46 on Friday, December the 30th. Wow, where's the year gone? Thank you very much indeed for your company, also all of your messages. So we've been talking about Vivienne Westwood, we've been talking about Pele. Obviously, two massive icons very sadly have left us. But obviously, this year, lots and lots of famous people have died as well, including obviously Her Majesty the Queen, people like Dame Olivia Newton-John, Angela Lansbury, Robbie Coltrane, Mikhail Gorbachev, Christine McVie, Dennis Waterman, Bamber Gascoigne. I've got Lionel Blair here and Barry Crouch. You know, I had a great time with Lionel Blair once. This is, we used to go, so it's a long story, but I ended up in Windsor Castle with Lionel Blair.
As you do.
And June Whitfield.
Oh, June's lovely.
Yes, she was lovely. And all these people, and John Challis and all these people, these are real legends that we will never see again.
You're
and I find it
right.
desperately tragic.
I used to warm up, Give Us a Clue.
You did
I did.
not.
So, and Lionel, and he was brilliant. Michael Barrymore, that's how Michael Barrymore started.
That's right.
So I used to, when I was a baby lawyer, rather than washing dishes in an Italian restaurant, which I also did, I went to the TV studios and I warmed up Blind Date and Give Us a Clue.
Do you
remember? Thank you.
Yes. Oh, Graham.
Graham. It was brilliant. A brilliant. But Lionel was lovely. And he would come along and say, oh, that was really good or whatever. And this is wonderful. This is how Michael Barrymore started. Brilliant. And Barry Cryer. And the
such
comedian, brilliant guy, wonderful to the last. I loved it.
And all of these, I mean, I don't know. I said this morning, which of these people means the most to you? Let me know. 0344 499 1000. Text the word talk in your message to 87222. Tweet us at Talk TV and tweet me at Dr. David Bull. Or indeed, ask anything that you want to on this festive season. By the way, it's my last show of the year.
Oh.
I know. I'm allowed some time off. I can't believe it.
Are you off somewhere exciting?
Well, I may be. I may be. I'm going to an airport.
Oh,
I know.
Good luck with the border force. Absolutely.
No, can you imagine? They will stop me. They'll be like, you've been talking about us.
Thank you. Yeah. You're a legal immigrant. Have you had your flu jab?
Yes, exactly. We'll have all of that. So that's exciting. But we fly tomorrow, so that's brilliant. That's very exciting. I can't believe I've only got, an hour and 10 minutes to go.
Heavens.
Yes, I am allowed some time off. But out of this list, who for you really stands out? I mean, for me, it still has to be Queen Elizabeth.
Oh, well, of course, Queen Elizabeth. And you're right, different people for different things. But there's also some who died too young. So people like Terry Hall, who was only 62. And that was the sort of virtually our age combined, obviously. But you work on that. He gave the soundtrack to our youth, you know, with the specials and the Fun Boy 3. And you have it amongst all of that. You've got Meat Loaf, you know, iconic sort of figure there. You've got all
Irene
sorts
Cara.
Yeah, fame. Not going to live forever. I know, but that's what people say. No, it is very, very sad.
Also, Sidney Poitier.
I know, incredible on that. Jerry Lee Lewis, Great Balls of Fire.
Yeah.
You know, and they talked about... And sort of
by the way, I mentioned June Whitfield then. Yes. She didn't die this year. The reason I mentioned her is because she was at the event where I was with Lionel at Windsor Castle. And Scylla was there.
Oh, Scylla was wonderful. Oh, and Scylla is lovely. I mean, absolutely lovely. As I say, I did Surprise, as well as... I won't try the accent. But she was wonderful. But they are...
I went night clubbing with Scylla.
Oh, did you? Where'd you go?
I can't tell you.
Oh, is it still open?
Yeah, I think so.
The one I know. What do you mean then? Fun.
Anyway, we're getting off the subject here. But, I mean, these are really extraordinary people. And, I mean, I think it really underpins everything I said right at the beginning of the show, which is, and I see this as a medic, life is very, very short.
It is. And in the hand, Robbie Coltrane, another fantastic name.
Absolutely.
You know, he's very sad. You're right. And also, we touched on this earlier, it's not just those in the public eye. This year, there have been lots of people, not just the elderly, but young. I have friends in my circle who've lost people who are even younger than me. And it's tragic.
And young sports players dropping down dead of heart issues and so on, and obviously there's a lot of talk about that. But yes, obviously we celebrate these people. I think actually when people die, it shouldn't be a sad time. It is a time of celebration.
Yeah, remember them. And they always say that, and it sounds a bit glib, and people don't really know what to say when people die, but actually they would much rather we celebrated their life than mourn their passing.
Well, apparently I forgot Leslie Phillips. I don't know if Leslie Phillips...
No, he was.
Was it this year?
I know, and that used to be the wonderful voice that he used to do Virgin Airlines and things like that. And
he had just the most fantastic accent.
Lord, he was absolutely wonderful.
But also that reminds me of the whole Carry On lot as well. You know, the whole thing, that was when British comedy was really...
When we were allowed to have that sort of comedy without it being banned, you know, all that sort of thing. No, but you're right. And again, this is what makes us... people, one of your wonderful listeners, readers, watchers, what they were saying is beforehand is, why do we mourn them? Well, the reason is that it's an outlet for our own grief and our own emotions.
But they define the era of you growing up, actually. So for me, all of these people define literally everything growing up. And that's when I met certain famous people. They were even more famous. And I couldn't talk to them because obviously they were icons of my youth. And when I worked at the BBC, I remember doing a show there. I got into the lift and Terry Wogan was in the lift. Couldn't speak.
Well, could you not?
Couldn't speak. Because he was such an icon, such a legend.
He's wonderful. Well, I work with, it could be all sorts of name dropping, but there's a reason for this, Stephen Hawking.
You worked with Anderson Cooper?
No, Stephen Hawking.
Stephen Hawking.
Stephen Hawking. And he was close.
Why?
Well, I'll tell you why. I looked after the world's biggest advertising agency in Japan.
Is there a job you haven't done?
Not yet. Well, I haven't done your job yet. If you want to pop to the loo, we'll sort that out. No, but so Stephen Hawking, so what happened, if you remember the movie with Bill Murray called Lost in Translation?
Yes.
And all about the advertising industry. Well, that's true. Lots of A-list celebrities go to Japan because it's huge amounts of money, and they work on the basis that they can sell all sorts of products without the rest of the world seeing it. So I negotiated on behalf of Dentsu. We got Margaret Thatcher and we got Jeffrey Archer for free. So we did that. I did a deal with Stephen Hawking for a brand called Uniqlo. And I basically was on Cambridge Green when 9/11 was taking place.
Really?
Filming with Stephen Hawking. And he was, I mean, an incredible man, and phenomenal sort of memories. But you're right about people who we see in the public eye. And you think, I mean, you're much lovelier, even in the flesh, than a lot of people. But it's true. And you work out, if you prick me, do I not bleed? If you tickle me, do I not laugh? There's some great people and some bad people. And people will often say, you get this all the time, I'm sure, when people see celebrities, they say, oh, that person's really rotten. Another person will say, oh, no, they were really nice. The short answer is yes to both of those, because people will have a good day and a bad day, and when you approach them, they're going to be both good and bad. Treat people with respect, treat them as individuals, they're all the same.
Well, also, and I've seen this from many of my friends and colleagues, so I think also there are types of celebrities. I think on the way up, you're very, very nice, and you're still very, very nice. And in the middle, when you're fighting for your position, you may be less nice. By the time you reach, true meteoric heights, you are really nice again. But you're right, also, it's about time and place. So, for example, I was having dinner with some famous people, and people were coming up and asking for autographs. Now, whilst that's lovely, you don't want to do it in the middle of the main course.
You're absolutely right. Or when people are popping to the loo or whatever, you don't want to approach people on that sort of basis. But you're right, be nice to the people on the way up, because you're going to meet them on the way down, is what they say.
Indeed. Steve Ronson says, David, the one celebrity death I cannot get over is George Michael. Such a huge talent gone too soon. I'd agree with that.
2016.
Yeah.
I know, it's a long time ago. And it is interesting when you're talking about timing. I was in this very studio with Petri Hoskin talking about Princess Diana, because it was basically the anniversary of her death, a big anniversary. And just a few weeks later, obviously, we lost Her Majesty. So people need an outpouring of grief, and because they basically punctuate all of our lives, that is why we get so emotionally touched by it.
Well, absolutely. Liana Murphy says, don't forget about Meatloaf. We did mention
we mentioned Meatloaf, and we absolutely... And there are the Tom Parker, Sarah Harding, Peter Bowles, John Challis, you know, the list goes on. And John was lovely.
He really
Only
was.
Fools and Horses. He was Boise in Only Fools and Horses.
Yeah. We met latterly,
man.
actually. I can't remember how I met him, but actually we stayed in contact as well. A really great man.
I met him through the royalty of Serbia, and we did a sort of magic show with him. And look at it, it's online somewhere with Boise, where he does a fantastic predicting something with me with the magic circle. So it's
Is there a job you haven't done?
Well, if there is, I'll do it next year. That'll be my resolution.
I mean, so clearly what you need to do to get on in this world is become a barrister.
Well, I think if you enjoy life... I'm wonderfully inquisitive, but I love to do everything. I always work on the basis that if you try something, then you'll have no regrets. And what really used to upset me as a kid is people say, oh, I wish I did that when I was your age. And I always felt, well, why on earth?
So that's a really good point. I say it all the time to young people, which is actually, you know, the limitation is your own imagination.
Yes.
So you really need to try things. And people say, well, I can't do that, I can't do that. There's no such word. But you need to try it. It doesn't always work, and it's like chucking mud at walls. Some of it will stick.
Well, I wrote a book about failure.
Of course you did.
Of course I did. And I always say, if necessity is the mother...
read it.
Yeah, colour it in.
Colour it in, yeah.
If necessity is the mother of invention...
Indeed.
Failure is the father of success. So you have to embrace failure and work on that sort of premise.
No, I agree. Also, I think be aware of your failings, your weaknesses, and try and work on those. But actually, aspiration, and this is the thing that I'm really passionate about with young people, which is to say, you can do anything. You really can do anything. Obviously, you need support and encouragement, but ultimately, it's all about effort.
Yeah, absolutely. And all the list of people that we've read out, they are inspirational. Pele is an inspiration for every poor person of colour in Brazil. You can see what happens there. Vivienne Westwood is an inspiration for being different, celebrate differences, and question everything.
Indeed. Very good words indeed. It's time for the news now. Still so much more to come. I mean, it's really extraordinary, isn't it, Andrew, that we've got the deaths of these two people, and obviously on the same day, but again you can see icons in their own way that mean so much to different countries. Vivienne Westwood here in the UK, and obviously Pele.
No, absolutely, and we talk about being an inspiration. The footage that you were watching actually with Vivienne in it was a canary cage.
Don't tell me you were there.
I was the canary. But it was outside the Old Bailey, and what Vivienne was brilliant at doing were these stunts to get the press attention. So singing like a canary to protest the detention of Julian Assange, and that was outside the Old Bailey. Right next to her was her son Joe Corey, who's the son with Malcolm McLaren, and they're absolutely the thing they'd love to be remembered about is this whole climate change and breaking awareness of that sort of stuff and the devastating effect.
I mean, look, climate change is very much on the agenda now. I mean, it's front and centre of the agenda. I think it's moved on in a bit, and I think everyone accepts that the climate is changing. Obviously, now the nuances are why is it changing and how much of that is man-made. That's a very different discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's P.T. Barnum famously said, if you want to draw a crowd, start a fight. And what Vivienne was brilliant at doing was not just using her fame, but using the media to expose all sorts of injustices.
Yeah, and actually, we need more people like her, really.
We do. We should. If you're one of those people, phone in now. We do. But it is inspirational. It's giving people a voice. And as we said beforehand, the theme of today's show about question everything, that was absolutely what people were saying.
So knowing her, do you think she would be surprised by the outpouring of love and attention that she's getting today? and the fact that she's sort of in the British psyche now so much.
I think she became part of the establishment. There was a stage when, obviously, it was anti-establishment at the very beginning in the 70s, but she was a dame. You can't get much more of the establishment than that. But people now respected her. There was a time when they used to ridicule her on talk shows and things like that. They would laugh at her various creations. And famously, Naomi Campbell had her famous stumble. She basically probably made her
in
famous.
Platform shoes.
Yeah, that's exactly the sort of things I'm wearing at the moment.
I don't doubt it.
But very difficult to walk in, not very practical. So she had that famous fall, which contributed to Naomi's wonderful success. But she attracted all sorts of wonderful people. There was Lily Cole at the launch of the wonderful book, and Pamela Anderson and so on and so forth. She would attract people who would have voices in the creative industry as well as other things. And having Vivienne in a room just lit the whole world, if you like. And the world is a darker place as a result of her
there are
passing.
enormous parallels with other people of that era, actually, and it seems the world was a different place in that they were in places where they got together, where they had free thinking, where they wanted to set the world to rights. And I'm thinking about musicians. I'm thinking about people like Freddie Mercury, for example, people who actually came together because of their creative industries, and actually they used that to change the world for the better.
Oh, we absolutely, and we have to celebrate.
Do we
differences.
still have that?
I think we're in a place where it might have gone to the other extreme. I hope that we are. We must celebrate difference. We must encourage people to respect difference in society, whether it's race, religion, colour, creed, sexual
and
orientation.
I think also one thing that I'm really aware of is there's no set career path. And I think so much of the time parents are so obsessed with saying their children need to do X, Y and Z, but actually it's really important that children do what they want to do with their heart.
Do what you're passionate about and you'll never do a day's work in your life. That's
I think that's right, and it's certainly a mantra I've followed.
That's good. What I loved, having done 5 years of qualifying as a lawyer, my grandmother came to me...
She was very pleased with that.
She came to me and said, I wish you'd been a doctor, is what she said. So we could have done that instead. But no, do what you're passionate about. And Vivienne and Pele and everybody else, they show that everything's possible.
Well, that's right. If you love it, you breathe success.
Go for it.
That's the end of it. Yeah. Andrew, thank you very much indeed. After the break, we'll be talking about hacking. Apparently, hacking is on the rise, and that is because of the increase in connected devices that link to the internet in your home. So the question is, how much is Alexa listening? This is Talk TV.
Hello and welcome to the Royalty Extra, where we take a closer look under the hood of the royal carriage. Joining me now is Vivienne Murphy as we discuss a royal Christmas. Hi, Victoria.
Hi.
So this is going to be an important Christmas for the royal family, the first Christmas without the Queen. What can we expect?
I think you're right. This Christmas is going to be very important. It's very symbolic. Obviously, King Charles III's first Christmas. We're going to see how he sees Christmases, royal Christmases taking place under his era. But also remember, it's the first Christmas that we will have had at Sandringham since 2019, because the past 2 years the Queen was at Windsor because of COVID. So there's this real kind of sense of bringing the family back together at Sandringham for the first time in a long time.
What traditions do the royals have over Christmas?
It's a very set sort of arrangement. There's 3 days, Christmas Eve, Christmas Day and Boxing Day, and they all have a very fixed set of activities that go on, beginning on Christmas Eve, which is the most formal part of the 3-day event. There's a formal dinner on Christmas Eve, and the royals open presents on Christmas Eve as well, following the German tradition. There's been a lot of, as I'm sure you're aware, information about what presents have been received over the years.
So sort of comedy presents. They don't go in for extravagant gifts.
Well, what do you know? Extravagant, they've got so much, haven't they? It makes sense that maybe they do things a little bit differently, but it's important to say that, you know, none of this has sort of ever been confirmed by members of the royal family exactly what has been given. So there's been talk of joke presents like a leopard print bath mat, a grow your own girlfriend kit, things like that.
And for Christmas Day itself, you and I have spent many a year standing outside Sandringham to watch the royals walk to church on Christmas morning. Tell us about the traditions on Christmas Day.
So that's the very public part of Christmas Day for the royal family. But the day, of course, starts much earlier, and there's also an early morning church service, which we sometimes see photographs. We've seen pictures of the Queen arriving there privately for the service, quietly. There's not a public moment, but she's been pictured doing that. But the main public moment for the day comes for the 11 a.m. service at St Mary Magdalene Church. As you say, you've been there many times, I've been there many times. It's a really lovely atmosphere, isn't it?
Yes, the gates open, the public can flock in, the cafe's open, everyone's standing around having
very important.
a cup of tea or a coffee and a mince pie. And then there, because it's actually one of the times you get the closest to members of the royal family, isn't it?
It's true, and it feels very relaxed and very informal. I think everyone's in good spirits. It's Christmas Day. There is obviously a police presence and security there, but you do feel, as members of the public, do feel they can get very close to the royals. They come out of the gates of Sandringham House and walk past the public to go to the 11 a.m. service, but it's not until they come out on the way back that they
Welcome back to Talk TV Breakfast. The time 9:20 on Friday, December the 30th. I'm joined by Andrew Eborn, who's a futurist, a broadcaster, a barrister. There isn't a job he hasn't done, actually.
The Swiss Army knife of professions.
The Swiss Army knife. I love that. I love that. Lots of messages coming in. Sue, good morning to you. Sue, dear David, excellent programme. Thank you very much indeed. As usual, I thank you for your shows. With regards to this year's flu jab, I had it in early October, and within 2 days I was struck down and very unwell for 3 weeks, and the full recovery only in the last fortnight. All of my previous flu jabs, no problems. Will I have one next year? Yes, I had Asian flu in my early teens in the 60s, and no way will I risk that again. I would urge everyone to get a flu jab. Thanks for your informative show. Well said, Sue. That's the point I was making earlier. The fact is that every single year the vaccine changes, and that is a best guess as to the variant that is circulating that year, and no, it cannot give you flu. Terry in Ramsbottom says they have soldiers checking vehicles at Calais Ferry Port. Well, that's good to hear, isn't it? And then we were talking also earlier, weren't we, about the different briefings that may or may not be transpiring from Border Force to the armed services back to Border Force, and of course where the government is. And this one's quite interesting. Chris Lee says, why would the government need to brief against the Border Force? We know really it's border farce. It's running a taxi service to the UK under orders from our woke government. There's not a lot of love lost.
I think that's the problem. And actually, and that's the thing, they're doing themselves a big disservice. They're not winning the hearts and minds of the people. And this is why the power and people understanding the power of spin doctors. I mean, we've done a whole show without talking about the royal family, but you talk about the power of spin doctors and how you can control the narrative and why that's so important in any negotiation.
But your point is really valid, which is always look at the source.
Yes.
Where is this information? And we were taught that in medicine. Yeah. What is the source?
Absolutely. But also it's timing. You know, what, when, how, why are the basic sort of things that you should be looking at. Why is this story coming out now? And you look, I mean, I'll give you Matt Hancock, the wonderful thing about the jungle. It was a cabinet minister with a revelation about the footage on election day, which didn't come out until about 6 weeks afterwards. And how did that footage end up on the desk of an editor of a newspaper? You work around and say, well, OK, yes, of course, it's all scandalous and hypocrisy and so on and so forth, but there are so many other questions you should be asking. So that's the lesson for today, I think.
Thank you very much.
Question everything. No, seriously, and you work on that basis. Where's the narrative coming from? Why is it coming out now?
This leads really rather nicely into our next item, and I want to question something. And there's this story that's sort of running around, which is about the increase in connected devices. Now, I don't know about you, but do you have devices in your house?
I am deviced up to the hilt.
So you have things like Alexa.
All those sort of things.
And they talk to each other.
They do.
She listens.
She listens, and not only that, you will then get fed advertisements. If you say, I want to go camping, all of a sudden advertisements for tents pop up.
Well, and so this is, I'm just really interested in the rise of these interconnected devices in the home and what it means in terms of cybersecurity. So joining us now, I'm delighted to say, is Guy Cocker, who's a tech expert. Good morning to you.
Morning, Dr. David.
Good morning. So there's been a lot written about this, about the fact we're increasingly reliant on the internet, and the fact is that we've got connected devices. And as Andrew says, I merely have to mention the fact that...
that's not good. That's Justin.
I was going to say that's Justin.
Hello, Justin. Good morning.
Justin's appeared rather too early. But if we can go back, if we may, to Guy, I'm not quite sure where Guy's disappeared to, but if you can still hear me, Guy, I'm just worried about what these interconnected... Oh, we've still got Justin again. It must be New Year glitches. But I'm just wondering, if I may ask you this, what are we doing when we invite interconnected devices into our homes?
Well, basically, a lot of these smart devices are sold by the likes of Amazon and Google, and they tend to be quite cheap, or they tend to run on quite sort of older hardware. And as you install new routers in your home, they not only get faster and they work over a wider area, but they also improve in terms of security. And I know I have a smart connected camera and a doorbell, and they use a very old standard. They use older Wi-Fi standards, which are less secure, and that means that your whole entire internet, your entire connected home, needs to be running on older technology, which is more susceptible to attackers. So someone that is motivated could sit outside your home and hack your Wi-Fi in a matter of minutes rather than weeks. So it's much more, it's much more susceptible to attack. Now, I think a lot of people are unlikely to have someone sitting outside their home in a car trying to hack their Wi-Fi, but if someone's so motivated, they're able to do it, and that's the danger in using a lot of these these smart home connected devices.
But obviously, it's part of life now, having all of these devices. What can we do to make sure that we stay safe?
Well, just what I do, and this is a bit of a nerd's way of doing it, a bit of a life hack. I try and connect as many of my devices via wire as possible, because a wired connection is much more difficult to hack.
So you're talking about cameras, for example?
Yeah, so my indoor camera, I have connected over a wire. Again, it uses a very old internet standard, so I have it connected via a wire. If you haven't got a wire that's long enough from your router to your device, then you can use what I use are home plugs, which interconnect your home through the electricity supply.
Right.
So you can do things like that. But what you really want to be doing is just making sure that you're checking your internet router. I know it's a bit nerdy, but log into your internet router and just check what devices are listed on there as connected. And anything you don't recognise, just block it. Just disconnect it. And then if it happens to be your son's, laptop or something, then you can reconnect it. But it just stops any nefarious devices being connected to your network.
And so one of the other things, and that it may be a little beyond some people, but certainly about multi-factor authentication, it's important to have more than one password, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's one of those annoyances. I know one of those real life things that I see my parents sort of using an Excel spreadsheet to keep all their passwords. It can be one of life's great annoyances, but it's really important. You use different passwords for each of your different accounts. If there's the option of multi-factor authentication, which some people will know as Google Authenticator, which just means that whenever you log in, it's another layer of checking that it's actually you that's logging in, then do enable it, and just try and use a password manager. There are lots of free options out there. They're on your phone, they're on your iPhone or your Android phone. You can also install apps like LastPass and Bitdefender. But there are lots of different options out there. And I know it's annoying for your viewers, but it's really important in this modern interconnected world.
Yeah, please do.
Guy, it's lovely to have you on, and really, really interesting. We're dispelling lots of myths here today. We would say very important. You talk about hacking, which is one side of it. What we were talking about as well is big tech. Are they listening to us?
Well, that for me is the big question, because I'm deeply concerned about that.
Yeah, I mean, if you're using a device from Facebook or Google or Amazon, the whole deal is that you're signing up to them monitoring it at all times. Now, what they tend to do is they tend to anonymize the data, but to improve the product, so they say, they will take random recordings. They will submit them to a human panel just to make sure that what you're saying is being responded to accurately, and that's
sure.
the sort of
so
that's the
on that
agreement
one,
that you're signing up to.
If I'm talking about a holiday and then a few seconds later an advert for a holiday pops up, is that all part of the process?
I think there's a lot of sort of scary stuff that pops up. Like you say, if you happen to be talking to your mum, for me, about a mattress, for example, then you get all these mattress adverts popping up. And there's a lot of weird. It's not as complicated as that. What happens is if I talk to my mum about a mattress, she's probably already searched on Google about a mattress, and what Google does is it interpolates the data and knows that me and my mum are in the same location, and then it starts serving me adverts for mattresses because it wants me to convince my mum to buy a mattress, right? Yeah. So it's not quite as complicated as you're always being listened to. It's just big data being harvested en masse to make very effective adverts, which is their entire business model.
But part of that big data is still listening. So is that right or is that wrong?
No, there's nothing to show that the big tech companies are using the data from smart connected devices that are listening to you to serve you ads. It's just very, very smart about using that data. Someone else in your household probably searching for whatever it is you're talking about, and then it's serving that ad. It's just very, very smart, because that's its business model.
It is very, very smart indeed. Thank you very much for your time, Guy. That's Guy Cocker, who is a tech expert. Now, after the break, we'll be talking about surprise rise in energy bills. Yes, more surprise rises. I'll be talking to Justin Urquhart-Stewart, who you saw just a minute ago. He's an economist and co-founder of Regionally, which is an online investment environment. This is Talk TV.
Join me, Ian Collins, every day on Talk TV.
There is nothing we hate more than hypocrisy.
Discussing the big issues.
Why was it so hard to establish the deputy leader was at a meeting with her colleagues? The callers: Alan in Grimsby, Tracy in Burton-on-Trent. Dave, thank you very much.
Picking apart the big stuff.
This simply does not wash. Look who's back under the spotlight.
Welcome back to Talk TV. The time 9:30 on Friday, December the 30th. I'm delighted to say I'm joined by Andrew Eborn, who's got headphones on. No, you're not allowed them on
I'm
anymore.
sorry, is that right?
You've got those on. You don't need both.
Well, this is not plugged in. Talk about connected. So there's a little hole. I've noticed with the guests. There's a little hole over there.
Well, can't you move that?
Well, move the hole? I'd love to move the desk around a bit.
No, I was just going to ask you on the back of that with Guy. I mean, it does seem to me that we're living in a almost dystopian world, because certainly my devices seem to know rather too much about
I think that's why I wanted to ask the question, because it was a bit confusing about whether you're being hacked or whether we're being listened to, and I think you need to distinguish those. What we also have to recognise is that we're being filmed every single second of the day. We're getting more information about us every time we use a loyalty card, every time you use your credit card, your mobile phone can pinpoint you.
And also, you can tell me as a barrister, because we're told all the time about, obviously it was GDPR, wasn't it, that came in, and you have to accept all these cookies, and actually, I don't like any of these cookies. I like cookies, I don't want those cookies. Right. And so I reject all of these the whole time, because all you're doing is giving them more and more data.
It is the new currency, is data. And the more information these big companies have about you, the more they can serve you with the advertisements and things like that. There was a big hoo-ha, if you remember, a few years back about identity cards. Complete nonsense, because you never need an identity card. We can identify people from CCTV footage, from their mobile phones, from credit cards and so on and so forth.
Well, I mean, it's extraordinary, isn't it? And people say, well, I don't mind about identity cards, because, of course, if you've got nothing to hide, it doesn't matter. But you see, I don't buy that.
No, I agree with you. And it's not about having something to hide. You've got a right to privacy. You want to know what people know about you.
Well, I agree.
And people blindly accept all sorts of things, or accept terms and conditions. Very, very, very few people read it.
And also in terms of store cards, the thing that I find very interesting is you think you're doing it because you get offers. No, you're doing it because the supermarket then knows everything about you.
They want it. It's a trading. Data is the new currency.
Frightening, isn't it? Andrew, thank you very much indeed. Let's take a quick break, and then I promise we will speak to Justin Urquhart-Stewart, economist and co-founder of Regionally, an online investment platform, because we have found out there will be a surprise rise, oh yes, yet again, in energy bills in January. This is Talk TV.
It makes life a very joyless kind of experience, doesn't it? I don't know what's going on in the world. Everybody's upset for something, and no matter what you say, can't please everybody. But for me, the only person I'm interested in pleasing is my wife, and I'm struggling with that most of the time.
I can't play like that because my wife gets mad. My wife gets so mad when I'm playing. She doesn't like my sense of humor.
Well, your wife
She's always thinking I'm going to get cancelled or something.
You boasted openly of having 6, 7 partners at once. So is that righteous? I'm not taking him. There's no moral view from me.
Welcome back to Talk TV, the final part of Talk TV Breakfast with me, David Bull. Thank you very much indeed for your company. The time 9:36 on Friday, December the 30th. I'm just reading out some of the messages, or at least I was just reading some of them. David, you are lovely, but you're a typical doctor when it comes to denying illness after a flu jab. You read out a message from someone who had a jab in October and has just only felt better, but you took them from their message. They'll still be having... I just read the message. They'll have another one next year, having had Asian flu decades ago. Why don't you address the fact that many people are very unwell after a flu jab? It's like a permanent denial. Until addressed, people will still clear of it. Other than that, I love your show. I don't know how to reiterate. Thank you very much, Christine. Very good to hear from you. I don't really know how to respond to that, because the thing is, the flu jab is an inactivated vaccine. Yeah. There is no live virus in it. Okay. It is a best guess. Yes, of course, you may be ill, but this would be a concomitant illness rather than being a cause and effect. So, Christine, I'm sticking to my guns, I'm afraid, but I do love the fact you love the show. Thank you very much indeed. So, we want to move on now, if we can, to talk about something else which caught my eye this morning, and that is that energy bills are on the rise. Again, it seems quite extraordinary to me, given that we've got the energy price cap in place, given the fact that I thought we knew what we were going to be paying, that things may not be quite what they seem. Well, joining us now is Justin Urquhart-Stewart, who's an economist and co-founder of Regionally, an online investment environment. Good morning, Justin.
Good morning. Nice to see you again.
Nice to, nice to see you again in the right item. Very good indeed. Well done. You were just a little premature this morning. Hey. Justin, talk us through this, because there's a lot of headlines this morning about about a surprise that's coming. My understanding is, with the energy price cap, and it's very important to stress this is not the maximum you pay, we were talking about it earlier, that this is very much for an average house using the average amount, that the government therefore can basically set the tariff so that the price cap is really more of a sort of goal. You shouldn't pay more than £2,500. But they are sneakily doing something else, aren't they?
Now, what you're finding with this is most appalling communication. They are with Andrew, who's a professional communicator and an excellent barrister, unlike me, who's a complete waste of space. Is the ability of the government to be able to communicate to people, to tell them what's going to be happening. All they've done is mislead people. We saw mistrust doing this, particularly about reference to the cap. But as you just said, it's not a cap. It's just an average of the calculation.
So I don't understand. Why did they call it a cap?
It was misleading, to say the least, but being very unpleasant, you'd say it was lying. They're not lying, just they didn't understand their own jargon. And what we need to do, and this is so important right now, because these bills haven't just gone up a bit. We're talking about, you can see it certainly in terms of the business and pubs and such like, doubling, trebling of their bills. They can't afford it. So rather than just giving people a misleading issue about a cap, much better that you actually explain to people what can they do and how can they mitigate against this. And it's particularly important, I think, for businesses. And the government said that they've delayed telling business what's going to happen in terms of their cap arrangement for the next quarter. How can you run a business when you don't know what your costs are? These people are just misleading and damaging our economy. We need to be absolutely clear. And for the private individuals, it's very difficult. Normally you'd say shop around, but you can't. We're stuck. And all you can do, I'm afraid, is actually buy yourself a bigger duvet. Find ways of making yourself warmer and providing your own support. There is some financial support coming through for all of us, but frankly, it could be far better directed. With the best will in the world, I can suffer those pay increases, but there are millions of people, not just those who are incredibly poor, but up into the middle class, who are going to find these very, very painful indeed, even with a supporting item.
So I am very confused. So the headline this morning says millions of households face surprise rise in energy bills from the 1st of January. Now, it goes on to say that the vast majority of energy customers, the rises will be minimal, but some people could be hit with even more than £100 a year. Now, the government continues to say it will be about £2,500. However, 12 energy regions in the UK mean for them they can now change their prices because there has been a new top level that has been brought in. And it seems that the hike is going to be worse for the people in North Wales and Merseyside who pay their electricity after the fact, i.e. if you're not on direct debit. And just trying to read through this, and it is really complicated. So those people who pay on standard credit, which means they get an invoice every month or quarter and don't pay by direct debit, will see their bills go up quite significantly. And it seems to me that with all of these energy suppliers, they're putting up their tariffs, that is their day and their night tariffs, by anything from 17% or 9%. I didn't think they were allowed to do this. I do not understand how that this has suddenly been leaked out.
Well, what is irresponsible here is, of course, you're supposed to have a regulator who should regulate these pricing structures and regulate the participants. Oh, yes, we do have. I think it's called offsod, because it does nothing at all in terms of actually making sure that not just there's a fair principle in there, but we actually understand what it is. If you're allowing the individual areas to start making adjustments to their tariffs without their clients fully understanding for it, well, there's a perfectly good reason why people actually should be taking a class action against some of these companies, because of the amount involved and the lack of the ability to communicate effectively. What can I do? They should be asking the regulator, and what they're getting back, I'm afraid, is, well, give you some money. After that, we'll let you know.
Well, the extraordinary thing is that it seems that many of these energy companies haven't actually revealed how much the prices are going up by at all. And so this has left customers very, very confused, including myself, as to what we're actually going to have to pay. Now, when you look at this, apparently it's going to go up by about £3.90 a month on average. That ranges from about £2.60 in the north of England to £5.60 in Mersey in the North Wales. But when you dive into the detail, let's look at E.ON Next, for example. Their night rate goes up from 13.9p to 16p, which is 17% hike, and the day rate is also going to go up from 42 to 44. So actually this is all nonsense, because it's not about a cap. It means that if you use more electricity, actually your bill could go up quite significantly.
Yeah, I mean, so because of the way they put that over, you have no real means of understanding it. Mind you, this has always been the case with the power companies. When you tell your gas bill, you know, how many therms you've used. For heaven's sake, what's a therm? Nobody's going to really understand that, and actually could be able to compare different providers. That's what's so difficult for them to be able to manage it. Now, there are various websites you can go to type in and see what comparisons you can get. But the problem is, actually transferring, finding yourself taking on to another firm, they probably don't want you anyway. One of the problems they've got at the moment is because we've had the collapse of so many firms, the clients have been put on to other, the older firms, and of course they can't manage it very well. The service has gone down. You try getting hold of the helpline. You need a helpline to get hold of a helpline. And it's just a really dangerous and frankly irresponsible way of trying to run this economy. Because what's that one word that runs the economy? Confidence. And if you can't even have confidence as to how am I going to make sure I keep the lights on and the heating going, then hardly surprising, our economy, already weak, may show signs of getting weaker. Here is the time for some clear messaging from the regulator and the government to be able to make sure that we better understand. Otherwise, that is just irresponsible.
Well, I agree, and also I think people have forgotten that this energy price cap, which isn't a price cap, is also going up from 2,500. I think it goes up to 3,000 in April. That's a nice New Year gift, isn't it?
Perfect one. It is ridiculous. And the fact they're not giving you actually proper forward warning for it, and then that is, again, not just a weakness. That's not how you run a country, not run a business. Now, one of the big problems we're going to have in the economy this year is, of course, we're very good at setting up businesses. We've set up more small businesses in this country than France and Germany put together. We're not so good at growing them because we can't give them finance too easily. But you can't run any small business unless you have some idea actually as to how you try and coordinate your finances in advance. So you can actually do an old-fashioned thing such as budgeting. Now, what families have to do is start trying to do that on a broader basis. Unfortunately, the energy company is very happy for us all to be individual and to be able to have more separate accounts. And, of course, as we were talking about earlier, more data on us. When in fact, actually, what we should be doing is trying to pool our services to actually make sure we're operating as a family, to actually try and make sure you're getting the best deal you can for a group of you, rather than suggesting being picked off as individuals or households. So there's more that can be done here. But above all, some forward planning here. Otherwise, I'm afraid this government is yet again managing to find a large shotgun and its feet to actually fire into it.
Justin, very, very wise words indeed. Justin Urquhart-Stewart there, economist and co-founder of Regionally, an online investment platform. Let's talk about something completely different now, after that terrible news about energy bills. And that is that boxing plans to introduce a new category for transgender athletes in 2023. Now, the World Boxing Council is one of the sport's leading governing bodies. It's going to invite transgender athletes to come forward next year to compete in a division or tournament solely for trans fighters. Now, when I today, well-deserved, perhaps I won't watch any more news until after 12th night. And you thought, well, a week.
Must be a week.
It must be a week. I must be a week. So when I first read this, I thought, oh, here we go again. But actually,
find how many of those who are trans want to go on and do, want to go through their personal journey and then take up boxing. And I would, I think the motivations for any man who wants to become a woman to basically legally pommel a actual woman in the ring needs to be questioned quite deeply. Again, I think it's a good idea to recognise that the biological sex, in particularly the effect of going through your puberty as a man, has an unalterable effect upon your body and gives you a literal and actual mechanical advantage when you are competing in a physical sport against women. Yeah. And I hope other sports will follow suit and provide an obstruction to the mediocre opportunists who have had rather indifferent sports careers as men, who are now playing women's sports and, doing rather well at it, given their natural advantage.
Well, thank you very much indeed for talking to me this morning, and I wish you a very happy new year. That's Miranda Yardley, who's a human rights advocate. Time for a quick call. Rabina, my favourite, Rabina in Braintree in Essex. Good morning.
Lovely boy. I like your tie.
Oh, good, lovely, good. Thank you very much. How was your Christmas?
Very quiet, but very good. You know, I live in the annex of my son's house, and they look after me beautifully.
And just remind us how old you are.
95.
Wow. 95, Rabina, yes, and going strong. So you had a nice Christmas, that's good.
Yeah, and I remember when Lionel Blair and his sister used to dance in the underground during the war, entertaining people who were sheltering there.
Is that honestly right?
Yeah.
Which underground?
I don't know. Well, one of the London undergrounds, the nearest to obviously where they lived. And both he and his sister used to dance there, entertaining people.
That's right. His sister was called Joyce.
That's right. And of course, we lost Joyce and Lionel. Well, Lionel remained Lionel, didn't he?
Yeah, I mean, amazing. I mean, I was fortunate enough to know Lionel and spend time with him, and he was such a wonderful man as well. But those stories, these are the most incredible stories, actually, when you dig down into what people did and how they entertained each other. And also, may I say, Rabina, it's such a pleasure to talk to you as well. Are you doing something nice for New Year?
No, just being quiet and looking
You're not quiet.
at television and sending lots of love to you, and hurry up back on telly.
Oh, I see. Well, no, Rabina, I am having a holiday because I think I deserve one.
How dare you? What am I going to do without you?
Well, I will be back. I'll be back doing weekend breakfast when I'm back. But no, I'm just going away for a couple of weeks, and I think it's well deserved.
Have a good time because you deserve it.
Oh.
And you know you're my favourite.
Oh, you are sweet, Rabina. Oh, I've got all choked. Rabina, thank you ever so much. And I really do hope you have a very happy new year as well. And I'm sure we'll talk in the new year. Lots of messages coming in as well. John in Lincolnshire says, I love your show today. Have a good holiday. I shouldn't have mentioned it really, should I? But have a good holiday. Well deserved. Perhaps I won't watch any more news until after 12th night. Well, there you go. Thank you very much indeed for that, John. And thank you to you as well, Andrew. It's been fun,
an
hasn't
absolute
it?
joy. And I love meeting, albeit virtually, some of your audience. brilliance. I thought Rabina was glorious.
She is glorious.
Wonderful?
And also the thing is, so Rabina has called in a lot, and the thing I love about her is obviously she's seen a great deal in her lifetime.
Yes, 95.
And also she can take us back and give us reference points in that time, but also she says what she thinks, and for me that is really what this station is all about, which is it should be the home of free speech.
Oh, I love it, and you've encouraged that, and even people calling you liars and things like that.
Yeah, you're a liar.
Yes, no, come on, and you read it out.
Yeah.
So to your credit...
Well, thank you.
No, but it's right, because otherwise you could just go through there, just read out the nice ones, and there's lots of those. You've got far more nice ones than other ones. What I love is we've got an opportunity then to correct any misunderstandings, and that's been particularly good today.
Well, I think so too, and you know, obviously the more that you can bring these subjects out into the daylight, of course you can dispel all the myths and the rumours.
George, or not war, that's what you say.
Well, exactly right indeed. Are you doing something nice for New Year?
I do something nice all the time. I'm here tomorrow morning.
Are you?
Even earlier than we started this morning.
Who's doing tomorrow, Jeremy?
Phil Dave.
Oh, Phil Dave's doing it.
Yes,
Oh, marvellous.
I think I'll just sleep in the corner.
You'll be in very good hands with him tomorrow morning.
Joy, I know Phil very well.
Oh, good. And then New Year's Eve, are you doing anything?
New Year's Eve, I'm dancing on all sorts of channels, but yes, I'll be doing all sorts of things. Every day's a holiday for me. It's got to be good.
Oh, well, you honestly, you have a charmed life. No, you've worked very hard for it, so thank you very much indeed for all your help. And Mike Graham, good morning.
How are you?
I'm very well indeed.
Hello,
How are
Mike.
you?
How you doing? Nice to see you.
Are you well?
Happy New Year. Yeah, I'm all right, actually. Weather's a bit rotten.
A bit rotten?
A bit rotten.
It's like really rotten.
You're going somewhere warm, aren't you?
I am.
I heard you mention it once or twice.
Only twice?
Yeah.
No, I think I deserve it. I did 60 days on the
Yeah,
trot,
but you can't actually say you think you deserve it, though. You shouldn't. No, I can say that. I can say I think
Could you say
deserve
that?
it. Yes, I think you deserve it.
Thank you very much.
Very well done.
Thank you very much.
But you can't say you deserve it yourself.
Will you miss me?
I will, of course.
Will you?
Absolutely. When are you back?
I'm not telling you.
No.
17th.
Well, blimey.
I know.
That's all right, isn't it?
I know.
Very nice. Where are you going?
I'm not telling you. I don't want to. I'm going somewhere warm, and I'm going somewhere warm.
You're going somewhere near where my ex-wife lives.
No, I'm going to Miami.
Yeah, there you go.
And my mum is coming along.
My daughter is in Colombia at the moment. She went to Colombia with her friends. I'm kind of going.
Would you say, is that wise?
Well, I don't know. Apparently it's a place where a lot of people are now going on holiday.
Yeah.
You know, they go to like Peru and Colombia because it's a bit more interesting. And then they all complain they can't afford to buy a house.
Enough,
well, stop going to Colombia and India. Places that cost quite a lot to get to.
And also, I'm going to Colombia as well, but on a ship.
No, are you?
Yeah.
Are you going to Medellin?
Don't think so.
No?
I don't know. Stop asking the questions.
Cartagena?
No, we're not. No.
No.
No, I'm not going to tell you anymore.
Okay.
Because
right.
I know.
You started it.
Well, I'm going to turn round I'll turn round and you'll be there.
Well, exactly. I went with his daughter.
He worries about me following him around.
I do.
I'm not doing that. I have people that do that.
Oh, fine. Okay, good. And what do you have?
Well, we're just going to have a sort of a casual look back at the year, really.
Oh,
because
really
this is our last show of the year. Because I won't be back until Tuesday after this. And
another holiday.
Well, it's just a long weekend, isn't it? It's a Happy New Year time. So, yeah, just sort of looking back, it's been a very odd year.
Very
strange. And there's bits of it that you've completely forgotten about. So if you listen to the show, you'll remember them. Because we'll be asking people for, what their moment of the year was, that kind of thing.
That's nice.
We've got Annabelle Denham coming on from the IEA to talk about, the year in politics, which has been even more bizarre. We were on, I think I mentioned this to you the other day, Jeremy Kyle at Christmas. We were able to have an award for Prime Minister of the Year. Because there were three of them. I don't think we've ever done that before.
No.
Boris Johnson won it, actually, because he was probably the best one we had.
Did he give him a letter?
Slightly, well, no, I think it melted in the lights. But, it's just been very weird.
It has. It really has been.
I'm not very good at making predictions. I have no idea what 2023 is going to be like. I think it's going to be better. I think it's going to be better than we think.
So, also, we had some guy on this morning who was basically saying inflation is coming down, things are looking rosier. So, let's just hope. I mean, slow and steady, but it can't get any worse, can it?
Well, I think we're quite resilient. I'm seeing interesting story in the Times today about the unions running out of money as well.
Yeah, so, and I'm running out of time.
Are you?
Yeah, have a good show.
Have a nice holiday.
Thank you very much indeed for your company. I'm back in a couple of weeks' time. This is Talk TV.